You are listening to Chaste Mate, Tiger Shifter Romance, Cybermates Book 3, written by Candace Ayers, narrated by Maeve York. Chapter 1. Arden. With a raging hunger so fierce, her pulse raced and her knees quivered. Federico's kisses devoured Katiana until she was consumed in burning flames of fevered passion. She was a moth to his flame, peanut butter to his jelly, cheese to his macaroni. But as the mysterious figure in black emerged from the shadows, Katiana's world shattered. Could she really be Federico's long-lost lover? In the blink of an eye, the pieces of Katiana's broken heart rained down like slivers of glass. Wow, that was so good. I sniffled and my hand flew to my heart. But the cliffhanger ending, oh my God. I grabbed a tissue from the bedside table, dabbed my eyes and blew my nose. I would have offered one to Flynn, but he didn't need a tissue. He was unconscious. Normally, I hate cliffhangers. I slid my Kindle back into its carrying case and kept talking, even though I was the only one in the room listening. Not to worry, though. Book 2 is pre-ordered and goes live at midnight, so tomorrow we can pick up where we left off. My gaze landed on Flynn's immobile form. Unless you're awake, that is. How about you surprise us all and wake up, huh? I knew as well as anyone that his prognosis made that unlikely. There had been too much brain trauma. I also knew that the longer he lay immobile, the greater the risk of something like pneumonia setting in, and that could be a death sentence. I'd read you the kind of books you like if I had any clue what those were. Since I don't, you're stuck with Dancing in the Golden Sunlight and, starting tomorrow, Loving in the Pale Moonlight. Flynn Bennett, the man in the hospital bed, gave no sign of acknowledgement. For months, Flynn had been my sounding board, my confidant, and my best friend. I tried not to dwell on how disturbing it sounded to say that a guy in a coma was my best friend. The whole thing had started innocently enough when I'd had to stop into the long-term care wing to drop off some mislabeled supplies, a shipment of bedpans that had been mistakenly delivered to our maternity wing. After that, the story got kind of convoluted. Somehow I found myself standing in Flynn Bennett's room, and somehow I found myself asking Camille, the charge nurse, all about him. What she revealed, no family, no friends, no visitors, no one, broke my heart. The rest, as they tended to say, was history. I'd learned in nursing school that, in rare instances, people emerged from comas having heard everything that had gone on around them. I hated the thought of Flynn lying in his hospital bed all day with no mental stimulation. He deserved to know he mattered, even if the only mental stimulation I could offer was reading romance books aloud and regaling him with stories of my boring love life. Flynn mattered. Weird thing was, he had begun to matter more and more to me every day. That reminds me, I went on that date with Martin Fink last night, the accountant I told you about, the one that my parents fixed me up with. I sighed heavily. He talked about himself all night, and I got a creepy sort of vibe from him. Like he peeks into neighbors' windows at night to catch them having sex, or he wears red lacy thongs and garter belts under his tweed business suits. I turned him down for a second date. My parents, well, my mother kept trying to marry me off to anyone with a sizable bank account and cushy stock portfolio. She couldn't seem to grasp the fact that I'd rather remain single than be bored to death by the Martin Finks of the world. She arranged dates for me, and as much as I wanted to, I didn't say no. Sometimes with my mother, it was easier not to rock the boat. I was holding out for a guy like Federico, provided Federico wasn't a weasel and two-timing Katiana with the mysterious woman in black, of course. Last night wasn't a total loss, though. They're showing Deborah Kerr movies this month at Sunkist Cinema, so we went to see From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster. I don't think Martin liked it very much, but it's always been one of my favorites. Next week they're showing An Affair to Remember. I sighed again, wistfully. Cary Grant. Now there's a leading man. I guess maybe I was just born too late. After my time, I mean. Is it so wrong to want passion, sparks? I grinned. Maybe a little naughtiness thrown in? I want sparks. I checked the time on my Fitwatch. Well, I need to get going before I'm late for Sunday dinner with the folks and the rest of my family. Cross your fingers my mom doesn't ask about Martin. He, of course, made no such gesture, but I stared at his hands anyway, mentally willing his fingers to move. They didn't. As I rose from the chair at his bedside, I reached out to run a strand of his silky hair through my fingers. I loved his long, flowing hair. I'll be back tomorrow, Flynn. Pleasant dreams. I tucked my Kindle under my arm and smoothed the thin sheet that covered his large form. Please, try to wake up. I paused briefly at the door for a final glance over my shoulder before heading back to the maternity ward to grab my purse. When I emerged from the elevator, it was obvious that Ruby had been dealing with a patient from hell. I knew it as soon as she stepped out of room 215. Ruby and I had worked together in maternity at Sunkist Key Medical Center for close to 5 years. We shared a kind of verbal and mental shorthand, and that vertical wrinkle between her brows was a telltale sign of distress. I met up with her at the nurse's station and squeezed her shoulder. What happened? Oh, nothing I can't handle. Mrs. Chan is demanding I bring her another baby. Huh? Yeah. She swears her cone-headed, flat-nosed, puffy-eyed newborn isn't hers, and she keeps threatening to have me fired for baby swapping. Ruby rolled her eyes. Uh-oh, fired. Whatever will you do? Laughing, she walked around the desk and began sorting through the paperwork that needed to be completed. Oh, it wouldn't be so bad. I could use the vacation time. She'll calm down in a day or two when the effects of being squeezed through a vaginal canal wear off and her baby looks more like the cherubic pictures in magazines. Hey, I forgot to ask, how was the date? She looked up at me and waggled her eyebrows. I groaned. He was a dud, story of my life. So I take it there was no after-dinner bow chicka wow wow. I barked a laugh. Hardly. Shame. When's the last time you swept the cobwebs out of that womb tomb of yours? Oh, don't start. I ignored her question, which, Ruby being Ruby, didn't deter her a bit. Girl, I'm telling you, there's more to life than work, spilling your guts to a guy in a coma every day and going home to a cat. You need to get yourself laid. I shrugged. Was it my fault I had no luck with men? Waving her off, I strolled to the elevator bank. I'm out of here. See you tomorrow. As I rode down to the parking garage, I fantasized for the gazillionth time about Flynn Bennett. What would it be like if he kissed me the way Federico kissed Katiana in Dancing in the Sunlight? A kiss with raging hunger and flaming passion? I damn sure never experienced a kiss that made my pulse race and my knees quiver. Or a kiss like the one Burt Lancaster gave Deborah Kerr in From Here to Eternity. I thought of Martin's stiff, cold lips and how they'd felt against my cheek when he'd said goodbye. Maybe those pulse-racing, knee-quivering kinds of kisses didn't happen in real life. But if they did, I imagined Flynn Bennett was the kind of man who could deliver one. I paused at the foot of the front walkway to shore up my backbone. Sunday dinner was a family tradition that I'd never been able to escape. I knew this for a fact because I'd spent many Saturdays devising creative excuses. None worked, not against the iron will of Arden Richardson. Marguerite and James Richardson, my mom and dad, lived in a huge house at the end of Palm Street. Right on the ocean, of course, with a wraparound porch and no less than 6 ceiling fans swirling overhead at all times, even with the central air running. There were always vibrant flowers blooming in the planter boxes, and the handmade wreath on the front door always corresponded to the current holiday season. The house was picture perfect, much like the couple. But for me, growing up, the place had seemed more like a granite and shiplap prison. Just as I took the first step, the front door burst open and my sister Chloe's icy blonde head appeared. "What in the world are you doing just standing there, Arden? You're already tardy. Get in here. Dinner will be on the table any minute." Chloe was the mirror image of Mom. Tall, slender, naturally blonde with perfect, blemish-free porcelain skin. She also had the perfect husband, the perfect children, and the perfect dog, all of which made her the apple of my parents' eye. Her perfect husband, Vincent Hill, owned a chain of nightclubs in the Miami area. Her perfect children, Courtney and Mason, attended exclusive private schools in which they earned perfect grades. Coming, I sauntered to the front door, attempting to gather my mental armor before facing the metaphorical firing squad. "What are you wearing?" Chloe's button nose wrinkled as she frowned down at my outfit. I glanced down and frowned back at her. "Scrubs? I worked the weekend shift." My other sister, Haley, pulled the door the rest of the way open, the corners of her lips turned down as well. "You didn't change for dinner?" "I came straight from work." Gee, one would have thought I'd worn a bikini to a 5-star restaurant. What was the big deal? I showed up. Wasn't that the important thing? Besides, my scrubs had a cute pattern of playful kittens on them. Haley's lip twisted and her nose wrinkled, the same face she always made when I mentioned my job. Haley was the oldest and the most like our mother in demeanor. Mom and Chloe could have passed for twins, but Haley inherited Mom's razor-sharp tongue and disapproving scowl. Haley was also the golden child, especially when it came to Mom. I had a sneaking suspicion it was because she'd married a plastic surgeon and got family discounts on Botox injections. Haley and Stuart had 3 of their own perfect children, all away at the best boarding schools in the country. She spent her time spearheading countless charity functions and growing competitive flowers that she referred to as her babies. If there was a race for the number of trophies and ribbons awarded, her flowers and her children would be neck and neck. Chloe was the apple of my parents' eye, Haley was the golden child, and I was the black sheep. Everything Chloe and Haley had perfected, I had managed to flub, according to Richardson standards. I had no children, sat on no committees, hosted no fundraisers, and had no prized flowers. All I had was a job, a handful of relationships that went nowhere, and a cat named Hissyfit who hated everyone, including me. Honestly, Arden, you still haven't gotten over that job thing? Come on, if the roast goes cold, we'll all get an earful about you being late. My family spoke about my job as though it was a silly phase I was going through. To them, graduating from an accredited nursing college and passing the NCLEX-RN exam was not nearly as impressive an accomplishment as marrying well, having babies, and growing flowers that won prizes. I really wasn't in the mood to rehash the merits of a fulfilling career versus a wealthy husband. Some arguments never died. "I'm 10 minutes early." Haley raised a perfectly shaped brow. "Not by the grandfather clock. You're 5 minutes late." Internally swearing, I forced a smile on my face. "That clock is 15 minutes fast. Everyone knows that." "And everyone knows that's the clock Mom goes by." "Arden, why didn't you change? I'm sure you had a few minutes." Haley looked me over as I squeezed past her into the house. "At least to get the germs off you." I worked in the NICU today, no germs. I headed straight to the kitchen, forcing myself to face Mom and get it over with. As soon as my mother saw me, her jaw dropped and she shook her head. Arden Danielle Richardson, it's no wonder you're still single with dinner attire like that. Are those cats? Sorry, Mom. I didn't think I was being auctioned off to the highest bidder tonight. I barely stopped myself from giving her an eye roll. Not if you show up looking like that. She heaved a heavy sigh and pulled the roast from the oven, always pretending that she made the food herself. We all knew it was prepared by my parents' cook, Magdalene. I just got off work. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do with you, Arden. At this rate, you'll die an old maid. I bit my lip and followed her into the dining room. The 12-foot table was set the same way it was every week. Lalique china, 3 forks, 2 knives, 3 spoons, and a linen napkin at every place setting. Water goblets had been filled, and my father had uncorked a bottle of Merlot from the cellar. I sat at the end of the table, between my mother and my niece Courtney. Vincent, Stuart, and Dad were at the other end discussing the new Miami Dolphins quarterback while the food was passed. I took a few thick slices of roast, a serving of green beans, and when the potatoes came around, I helped myself to a hefty scoop of them. Oh, and a couple of rolls. All I'd had to eat that morning was stale chips from the vending machine. Oh, Arden, you really should cut back on the carbs. Mom's disapproving tones silenced the entire table and drew everyone's eyes to my plate. I looked around, noticing that I had piled twice as much food on my plate as my mother and sisters. I sighed. If I had to suffer through Sunday dinner, the least they could do was let me enjoy the food. I skipped breakfast and lunch. Work was busy. Dad cleared his throat. We don't discuss work on Sundays, Arden. I leaned back in my chair and rested my hands on the table. I wanted to say something, anything, in my own defense, but I knew from experience it wasn't worth it. I was always outnumbered in my family. I'd learned to just let things go. Sit up straight, honey. Slumped posture will catch up to you and you'll end up looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Mom smiled at Haley. Your sister has excellent posture. I swallowed down my anger and bit my lip harder as Dad blessed the food and the quiet clang of silver on china started up. Shoveling a scoop of potatoes into my mouth, I mentally said my own prayer, the same one I said every Sunday. Lord, grant me the ability to hold my tongue and not let the words I'm thinking come shooting out of my mouth. Chapter 2. Arden. Arden! I turned to see a prior patient of mine striding toward me wearing a huge grin. Hi, Parker, right? How is the little one? Stella's great, growing like a weed already. She's quite a handful, not that I'm complaining. Parker wore the proud smile of a new mom. She's not ill? Parker shook her head. No, not at all. I came to see you. I wanted to thank you for your help when I was a patient here, and I brought you this. She produced a small gift bag from behind her back, as a thank you. My hand flew to my chest and I blinked back tears. After dealing with my family at dinner earlier in the week, a show of appreciation like that hit me right in the feels. That is so nice. Unnecessary, but so nice. Oh, it's necessary. Open it. She handed me the gift bag and clasped her hands together while she waited. I reached in and pulled out a small tin. Inside were what looked like gift certificates. They're for local businesses. There's a free coffee from Latte Love, free cut and blowout at Jammy Salon, free night stay at Rise and Shine B&B. You're always taking care of others. I thought it would be nice for you to get some pampering. Oh, wow. That's so thoughtful. I reached out and pulled her in for a hug. I was just doing my job. I really don't expect a gift for it, but I really... I was so choked up, I couldn't finish the sentence. Laughing, she captured my hand and squeezed. Maxim told me about how he got a little woozy in the delivery room. He says you caught him before he hit the ground. I giggled at the memory. Her husband was huge and, yep, he went down. It wasn't unusual. Expectant fathers did that from time to time. I hadn't so much caught him as broken his fall when he landed on me. Yeah, he was, moved by the birth, to say the least. Well, I'm just glad he didn't flatten you like a pancake. I've had that man on top of me. When she noticed my eyes grow wide, she bit off the rest of her sentence. She tapped the gift certificates. Anywho, they're from both of us. I held the gift to my chest, truly touched. Thank you so much. I could use a little TLC, so this couldn't be more perfect. Still clutching the certificates to my chest, I watched as the woman turned on her heel and practically bounced away. She was a force of nature, that was for sure. I liked her. I went around the desk and dropped the gift bag into the file cabinet where we stored our personal things. Then my eyes scanned the to-do list I kept there. I'm off to take my lunch break. Off to see that perfect man? The one who always listens and never talks back? My only response was a non-committal shrug before I headed into the break room for a quick bite. I no sooner started a fresh pot of coffee than my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and groaned when I saw it was my mom calling. I silenced the call, but when it rang again barely a minute later, my stomach knotted. Was something wrong? Maybe it was a family emergency. Mom? Arden, why don't you ever answer your phone? I'm on shift, Mom. Is everything okay? That job again. Mom conveyed her annoyance with a dramatic exhale. What if it wasn't okay and I couldn't get a hold of you because of that job? She said job like it was a dirty word. Unwilling to go down the same old road with her, I pressed on. What did you need, Mom? Her voice slipped into something as close to joy as Marguerite Richardson got. Your sister, Haley's, pregnant. My irritation was instantly replaced with excitement. Despite my issues with my sisters, I loved babies, such perfect little miracles. That's fantastic! Yes, she's 2 months along. It's great news. Another baby in this family is truly a blessing. Mom paused a moment and then went in for the kill shot. If only my youngest daughter would get serious about her future and settle down. And there it was, a bullseye. I am serious, Mom. I love my job. I can't wait to plan a baby shower. Maybe we could have a themed shower. Now, don't try to change the subject. I spoke to Martin Fink. He said you refused a second date with him. I told him that surely he must be mistaken, but he seemed to insist otherwise. Please, tell me you didn't refuse a second date with the man. He wasn't mistaken. It's true, Mom. There was no chemistry. Chemistry, honestly, Arden. You're 30 years old. Chemistry is for teenagers. At this stage, you're lucky that a man like Martin Fink is even interested. You work in a maternity ward, for goodness sake. You know all about the ticking of a woman's biological clock. One of the doctors on staff came into the break room and stood at the counter, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. I turned my back to him and huddled into my phone. I have to go. Martin has a wonderful job at Hamish, Abelman and Brock, the firm that handles your father's business accounts. He has a head for finance, and he'd make the perfect husband. Your father and I bent over backward to set you up with that young man. Your sisters were both married by 22 and had babies on the way by 25. And then there's you. I have to go, Mom. No, Arden, we are discussing this. I'm so tired of you avoiding reality, as though life were a fairy tale. It's not. I've convinced Martin to give you another chance, and thankfully he agreed. Mother! The doctor looked up and I smiled sheepishly. Don't mother me, Arden Danielle. He'll be in contact, and when he does contact you, I expect you to consider your future. I don't know where you come up with these notions about chemistry, but this isn't one of those romance novels or those old movies you watch. In real life, a woman needs security. The world can be harsh and cruel. You need a stable husband with a good job and a decent head on his shoulders. Martin fits the bill. And babies, you need those too. Divorce is all too prevalent in our culture today. Children will ensure your future. I reeled in my anger and blew out a sharp breath. I'm at work, Mother. I can't talk about this right now. I have to go. Fine, Arden, that's fine. Stop living in a fantasy world. She abruptly hung up the landline, slamming down the handset in my ear. I leaned back against the counter and rubbed my eyes. I felt like I'd just been sucked into the vortex of a hurricane, tossed around and spit back out, battered and bruised. Every interaction with my family seemed to leave me feeling that way. Why was it that everywhere else in the world I was a smart, capable, confident woman, but with my family, I was the kid who kept getting sent to the principal's office? You okay? I glanced over at Dr. Grabowski and forced a smile. Sure. He nodded and turned back to his coffee. My appetite was completely gone. Thanks, Mom. Turning my phone off, I headed to the elevators. As I passed the nurse's station, Ruby looked up, read my pained expression, and frowned. I just shook my head and kept my eyes down as I made my way to the long-term care wing at the back of the medical complex. As I turned down the hallway that led to Flynn's room, I passed the nurse's station, which was quiet as always. I peeked in and saw Camille, the older nurse who worked the day shift, at her desk. When I waved, she nodded and continued charting. I paused just outside the door to Flynn's room, thinking, as I often did, that just once it would be nice to walk in and see the room full of friends, family, flowers, and those Mylar balloons that said "Get well soon." I swung the door open. Everything was the same as the day before. The room was empty, except for the patient lying immobile in the bed and the soft hum and beep of the machines monitoring his vitals. I never got used to the sight of Flynn Bennett. My stomach always fluttered, my pulse always raced, and my breath always caught in my throat the moment I saw him. He'd lost a lot of girth and muscle tone during his stay, but he was still a large man, broad-shouldered with thick biceps and a chest that could stop a tank. As nurses, we tried not to let our jobs get to us. We had to grow a thick skin, but we were only human. It was impossible not to be somewhat affected by the injustice wrought on good people by illness and injury. There was no discrimination, no bigotry, no favoritism. Chronic or terminal illnesses and, as in Flynn's case, terrible accidents could happen to anyone. In short, the fact that he was wasting away in a hospital sucked big time. Flynn's face was peaceful, his full lips relaxed. He had thick, dark brows above his eyes that I just knew would be dark brown and smoldering. If they ever opened, I wished I could get a glimpse of them. Camille had recently shaved his face, but his hair needed brushing. She always left that for me. I retrieved the hairbrush from the drawer next to his bed. I didn't know what it was, but being near him comforted me, despite the fact that I felt a desperate longing for him to heal and to wake up. He should be raising kids, laughing, making love to his wife. If he had a wife, he didn't. I'd not only Googled him more than once, but I'd also sneaked a peek at his e-records. It was kind of against the rules, but I wasn't above a little innocent rule-breaking. Flynn Bennett was 32 years old. He'd been comatose for 6 months after a near-fatal accident. He'd been working at an automotive shop when a malfunctioning lift dropped the car he was working on, crushing him underneath. The ER doctors on call the night he was brought in noted that his wounds began healing remarkably fast. His subsequent medical teams noted similarly that his injuries healed incredibly quickly. All but the trickiest injury of all, his brain. There was no indication that he'd wake up. He was breathing on his own, had a nasogastric feeding tube inserted through his nasal passage that hadn't had any complications, despite the fact that, statistically speaking, complications with long-term use of the tubes were common. In every sense, he was healthy. His vitals were steady and stable, yet he wouldn't wake up, possibly ever. I pulled the brush gently through his hair, starting at the ends and working toward the roots. "Hi, Flynn." I used my finger to brush a strand of his dark hair off his forehead and felt a jolt of warmth. Every time I touched him, I felt a tingly warmth run through me. My morning was okay, until my mother called and insisted I give Martin Fink another shot. I suppose it wouldn't hurt. It's not like I have prospects lined up around the block. I stroked my finger over his cheek and wondered where his thoughts were. Did he even have any thoughts? According to his chart, his brain activity wasn't nil, but it also wasn't active enough for them to predict he'd return to any sort of functionality. My chest tightened, and I cupped his cheek, feeling more emotional than I probably should have over a man I didn't know. As I stared down at Flynn, the strangest feeling came over me. Visions of the story of Sleeping Beauty filled my mind, the 1959 Disney animated movie, a classic. Then my body moved without my permission, and I leaned down to gently kiss his cheek. I was an inch away from his face before my brain started up again. What the hell was I doing? I hovered for a moment before releasing a sad whimper, then I straightened. I had no business touching him like that, even if it was just a peck on the cheek. He was a patient, a human being with a right to his privacy regardless of his state. I forced myself to take a few steps back from his bed. Each step away from him hurt like a physical blow. Why was it so hard for me to put distance between us? Caught between leaving and going back to the maternity ward, or giving in to what I desperately wanted to do, I stood in the middle of the room wringing my hands. It was wrong, but now I had that stupid Sleeping Beauty fairy tale stuck in my head. It had been wrong for the prince to kiss Sleeping Beauty too. One couldn't just go around kissing people willy-nilly without their consent. Yet, I found myself taking a step closer to him. A voice in my head urged me forward, told me I'd regret it if I didn't do it. Fighting it was useless. It felt as though Flynn had his own gravitational pull, and it was drawing me in, closer and closer. I stared down at his face, a juxtaposition of beautiful and rough. I cupped his cheek, just a hint of stubble against my palm. "Wake up, Flynn." Leaning in, ever so gently, I brushed my lips over his. My mind knew it was inappropriate, but I did it anyway. I kissed him. When our lips touched, it felt like the rightest thing I'd ever done in my life. I breathed a small sob at the injustice. Tears pooled in my eyes. Before I could fully straighten, a massive hand clamped onto my upper arm. I gasped as it pulled me back down. I wasn't sure what was happening until I saw a pair of dark brown eyes staring up at me in confusion. I opened my mouth to call for Camille, but nothing came out. He latched onto my other arm too, dragging me closer with surprising strength. He said something. It was hard to decipher because his voice, after so long without use, was a mix between a raspy growl and a breathy whisper, but it sounded like he'd said, "Mate." When his lips pressed against mine again, the sizzle of electric sparks burned straight to my core. I forgot where I was and why I shouldn't be kissing him until the wild beeping of his monitors brought me back to reality. I pulled away and studied the monitors for a moment. Camille would be running in to check on him. She'd arrive any second. I had to go. I didn't belong there. I looked back down to find that Flynn had followed my gaze and, with a confused frown, was also staring at the machines. I shouldn't be here. I'm glad you're awake. He growled something incoherent as I turned to leave. I didn't stop until I reached the door, where I paused just a moment. Welcome back, Flynn. I swung the door open and almost collided with Camille. Is everything okay in there? I sniffled and cleared my throat. He's awake. I didn't dare glance back at the bed before I took off down the hall as fast as I could, while simultaneously wiping the tears from my eyes. The farther I got, the faster I went, practically sprinting by the time I reached the maternity ward. Ruby was at the station directing a smiling gray-haired couple, no doubt proud grandparents, to the nursery's viewing window. When she saw me, she stood abruptly. What's wrong? I forced myself to take a couple of deep breaths and hurried over to my list. As long as I focused on doing my job, I'd be okay. Running my finger down the column of items, I tried to make my eyes focus on the words, but I couldn't. Arden, talk to me. What's wrong? When I met her concerned gaze, my panic escalated. He's awake! Ruby was the only other person on this earth, besides Flynn Bennett's direct care nurses, who knew I visited him daily. There were so many thoughts and emotions swirling in my head. One was the fact that I'd kissed a patient while he was comatose. I could lose my job over that. I probably deserved to lose my job. I was mortified. Well, I would be mortified after the shock of seeing Flynn's eyes and the buzz from that kiss wore off. Who's awake? What are you talking about? Flynn Bennett. He woke up from his coma. Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. She threw her hands in the air before touching her forehead, chest, and shoulders, making the sign of the cross. I turned to face her and grabbed her hands. There's something else. Promise you won't say anything. Okay, I promise. I kissed him. I kissed a man in a coma. A patient. She stared at me blankly for a moment, and then laughed quietly so she wouldn't disturb the Chan family. When I didn't join her in laughing, she froze and squeezed my hands. You're not joking. No. What were you thinking? Why? I let her go and ran my hands through my hair, forgetting belatedly that it was in a ponytail. I don't know. I don't even know what came over me. I just leaned down and brushed my lips against his, and then he woke up. Holy shit. You're shitting me right now. I know you are. You gotta be shitting me. Are you shitting me right now? No. I kissed him and he woke up. She inhaled sharply and fell back down in her chair. Then what? Then nothing. I ran out of there. She just stared at me, her face a mask of incredulity. Then she flapped her hand in front of her face, fanning herself. Wow, that's like crazy romantic. Chapter 3. Flynn. My muscles were stiff and my brain was fuzzy. I definitely wasn't at 100%. If I were, I would have stopped my mate from running away. I tried, but she slipped out before I could get up out of this damn bed and grab her. I wasn't sure where I was. A hospital? It had to be a hospital. Some damn woman was fussing over me, asking questions and babbling something about a doctor being on her way. There were machines beeping around me and an assaulting odor of disinfectant. Why was I in a hospital bed? Couldn't remember. Didn't really matter. The only thing that mattered was my mate. Where had she gone? Why? And how could I get her back? I rolled over and swung my legs off the side of the bed, trying to push myself up to a sitting position. A wiry older woman in a white lab coat with a stethoscope around her neck ran into the room, gasped, and rushed over, holding her hands out in front of me. You're awake! Don't sit up. I need to examine you. You're still too weak to support your own weight. I ignored her and slowly sat up. A wave of dizziness hit me. Son, you're a miracle. It's not every day that a man wakes up from a coma after 6 months. What? 6 months? As the dizziness began to subside, A sharp pain splintered my skull. I struggled against memory fog and a splitting headache to figure out what the hell was going on. Everything was hazy. My only clear thought involved her. I needed to find her. That very thought seemed to rouse my tiger. He was sluggish but anxious to hunt down our mate. He had no patience for the doctor in front of us. The doctor was just an obstacle between us and our mate. His low growl made my head throb harder. "He's awake!" The room was filling up with people all standing around, wearing scrubs and gawking at me as though I were a circus act. And the talking, the room was buzzing with annoying chatter. The wiry woman put herself a few inches from my face. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Dr. Schroeder. We're going to get you scheduled for rehabilitated services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. We'll get you all set up, son." A few more people came rushing into the room, and I was overwhelmed with the feeling of being in a fishbowl. I clung to the doctor's shoulder, digging my fingers in. She winced but leaned in closer to my mouth to hear my growl. "Too fucking much." She held my gaze. "Everybody out, now." It was clear by the tone of her voice that she meant business, and the spectators filed out quickly. All but a heavy-set nurse who remained and crossed her arms over her chest when the doctor glanced questioningly at her. "I have been this man's caregiver for 6 months. I'm emotionally invested. He and I are practically family. I've seen parts of him that even his mama hasn't seen. I'm not leaving." I was only mildly horrified. "Well, I don't suppose I can argue with that. Come on, help me get him to lie down, Camille." I narrowed my eyes at the doctor. "I don't need to lie down." She watched me and shook her head. "You've been in a coma for 6 months, son. Your body's weak and your muscles have atrophied." "I heal fast." I looked toward the door, my mind replaying the kiss with my mate. So many things in my brain seemed foggy. I was terrified the memory of her might slip away. "Why am I here? What happened?" "Maybe we should wait for Dr. Morgan to arrive before we get into that." "Who? I thought you were the doctor." "Dr. Morgan is a psychiatrist. We need to assess your mental state as well as your physical state before we can formulate a rehabilitation plan." Shaking my head, I stood up and stretched. It was only when they both averted their eyes that I realized my bare ass was catching a breeze. I was wearing nothing more than a thin handkerchief-like thing that didn't even have enough material to cover my ass. I grabbed the sheet and wrapped it around my waist. "I feel fine. Better every second. I just don't remember how I got here. What happened to me? It's a blank." I knew the beautiful woman who'd run away was my mate, but I couldn't remember anything else about her. How had we met? I couldn't remember back that far. Her voice, I remembered that. I remembered her beside me, talking to me. It must have been at my bedside. She was what had kept me going. Her soft, clear, lovely voice reading stories and talking. Her voice had been like a beacon for me to cling to. Now I knew what her face looked like. Beautiful. She had a beautiful face and soft lips, incredible lips. 6 months. Holy hell. The nurse stepped up to me. "Let's get this tube out of you while Dr. Schroeder explains a few things." I sat back down and flinched as she slowly pulled a tube out of my nose. The sensation made me want to gag, but I tried to focus on the doctor and what she was saying. "It's normal after a traumatic head injury such as yours to have some memory loss. Your memory may even be spotty. Chances are it will all come back eventually. Don't try to force the memory, son. Your brain will work it out in its own time. Just let it happen." I shook my head. "Injury? I just don't remember." "That's normal. It might even be a good thing. You might not want the memory of your accident to return. The associated trauma could be significant." Frustrated, I looked toward the door again. I wanted my mate back. Again, I wondered why she had left and not returned. Where did she go? The nurse wiped under my nose, earning a grunt from me. She patted my cheek. "You mean Nurse Richardson? She doesn't work in this ward." I gripped my throbbing head and growled. "Richardson?" "Arden Richardson. Such a sweet woman." It figures that you'd wake up when she was in the room with you. She spent a lot of time with you while you were out cold." Camille grinned at me. "She's one of the good ones. The kind of woman any man would be lucky to have on his arm, if you know what I mean." "Camille," Dr. Schroeder all but wagged her finger at the nurse. "This isn't a dating game." "Arden Richardson, my mate. She was a good one. She was everything. I just had to find her and try to remember where and how we met, our history. I had her scent running through my mind, so finding her wouldn't be hard. I was a shifter, after all. I shouldn't have any trouble finding and following her scent trail. And the way her scent affected me—" "Whoa, your heart rate just spiked." Dr. Schroeder started poking and prodding me, checking me over. Camille winked. "Maybe it is a dating game." When the doctor scowled at her, she held her hands up in surrender. "That's all I'm saying." I wasn't about to spend one more night in a goddamn hospital room. The smells, the sounds, constantly being watched, it was way too much for me to take. As a tiger shifter, I was a loner, territorial. I liked privacy and my own space, which I marked and fiercely defended. I felt fine enough to go home anyway. Despite the bullshit they were feeding me, trying to get me to stay. What were they gonna do, chase my ass down the street? I'd like to see them try. There was just one problem. The piece of cloth I was wearing barely covered my ball sack. I still had a headache. The whole situation was a headache. I hadn't been home in 6 months? What about the shop? I scratched my head. Nurse Camille revealed that Arden, who stopped in every day, had been my only visitor. Then she informed me that I needed new friends. I didn't need friends. She didn't know it, but I didn't do friends. Not my thing. It still baffled me that my mate hadn't come back. I didn't know what to make of that. I only knew that I ached for her. I couldn't remember anything else about her except her voice and that kiss. I was irritated and more than a little cranky when Camille came back in with a wide smile on her face to run another check on my vitals. "Perfect. They're not going to release you, liability and all that, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. Between you and me, they want to keep you around to poke and prod you. But now that you're awake with your shifter healing, you'll be back to 100% in no time at all." I sniffed. She wasn't a shifter. How did she know I was? She saw my questioning look. "I mated to a wolf shifter. There are a few others here on staff besides me who keep an eye out and run interference when any of the local shifter population comes through the doors, although you guys don't need traditional human medical care very often. That accident of yours was pretty bad to knock you out for 6 months. You're lucky to be alive. Although, I have to say, maybe it was fate that you ended up here." Winking, she patted my hand. "I'm glad you finally woke up. Not a lot of people get a second chance after an accident like you had. I think you used up one of those 9 lives of yours. I hope you make the most of your second chance and find yourself some better friends." I hesitated. "Tell me about Arden. I can't remember. How did we meet? Have we known each other long?" The nurse's eyes twinkled and she leaned in closer. "I don't think so. Not sure you knew each other at all. But she's the kind you want in your corner, I do know that. That girl has been at your bedside every day. Loyal as the day is long, that one. She read to you, brushed your hair." I let that settle into my brain. We didn't know each other at all? I vaguely remembered like a hazy dream. Every day, huh? But we didn't, we weren't officially mated? Those are questions you need to ask her, but I will say this. I don't know how coincidental it was that she happened to be at your bedside when you came to. She pulled off her gloves and tossed them into the trash can. I'm not suggesting anything, but I know that Arden is single and has been for a long time. No, Arden wasn't single. Arden was mine. Not a chance that I was going to let her get away either. Wherever she was, I'd find her, and when I did. Can you find me some goddamn clothes so I can get the hell out of here? Crabby, you were nicer when you were in a coma. I scowled. Pretty sure that's a fucked up thing to say. Laughing, she was completely unfazed by my mood. Fine, I'll grab a pair of scrubs. Her eyes ran down the length of me. "Even the largest ones are gonna be snug on you, but at least your ass won't be hanging out." I gave her a stony look. "Hurry, I'm barely holding on to the little patience I have." As soon as she returned with the snug scrubs, I was out of there. My tiger was pacing, agitated, and on the verge of fighting his way out of my skin. He'd been trapped for too long. He needed to run. The staff tried to argue, all but Camille, who just watched with an amused grin as I paid them no mind. When they realized I was ignoring both their pleadings and their threats, they then insisted on calling a taxi for me. Nah, I was a fucking tiger. A few blocks down and I would hit a mangrove forest that extended to the rear of my shop. It was where I usually shifted to let my tiger roam. After I declined the taxi, the annoying fuckers insisted on wheeling me to the front of the hospital in a wheelchair. That was a hell no. And the end of my temper. I roared loud enough to cause a couple of the orderlies to jump straight into the air. Camille threw her head back and howled with laughter. I shot her a wink before turning and exiting through the front doors. As soon as I cleared a couple of blocks and got far enough into the mangroves, my tiger burst out of me, ripping the tight scrubs they'd given me to shreds. With a roar, we took off at a run deeper into the strip of woods. I remembered exactly where I was going, where to run so that I wouldn't be spotted by anyone on the island. I guess that meant my memory wasn't completely shot. When I reached an area with a secluded strip of beach, I ran straight into the ocean. The water felt great, and the sun was amazing. I swam down to the southern tip of the island, but to get across to the eastern side of Sunkist Key, I had to cross the main highway that connected the rest of the keys. Fortunately, it was getting dark, and I was able to cross without notice. At the very end of the island, right at the tip, facing Main Street, was my shop, Island Auto. When I shifted back, I was naked. But this being my usual shifting haunt, I kept a few changes of clothes in an unlocked lean-to out back. Good news, they were still there. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt, both roomier than they used to be, and inspected the perimeter of my building. The shop had a closed sign and looked abandoned. I peeked into the window. Everything looked the same as far as I could tell. The lights were all off in the shop, but a yellow glow came from my apartment upstairs. I had this wild, irrational thought that it might be my mate up there waiting for me. My heart leaped in my chest, and I ran up the metal stairs that were anchored to the exterior, taking them 3 at a time. I twisted the doorknob so hard the damn thing broke off in my hand. Fuck. I threw open the door and found myself face to face with a woman who wasn't my mate. I stared at her. She looked familiar. A faint memory tickled the back of my mind. "Oh, Flynn! Jesus, you scared me!" She hurried across the living room and threw her arms around my neck, planting a kiss on my lips. "I'm so glad you're home, baby." Chapter 4. Arden. As of 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I was still employed. The moment my shift ended, I practically ran out of the hospital and went straight home. I flew down Main Street with a lead foot and had to make myself slow down enough to safely make the turn onto Pelican Drive without the tires squealing too much. My house was the second on the right, a little one-bedroom bungalow with a small stoop. I'd always loved the coziness of it, but even more so tonight. Tonight, it was my sanctuary, my safe haven. Although the one thing it wouldn't protect me from was guilt, and I was riddled with that. I plowed through the door and headed straight for the kitchen and the bottle of Chardonnay I kept on the refrigerator door. Tonight, that bad boy was going down. Hissyfit lifted his head from where he was stretched out on the back of the couch and gave me the evil eye. I got it, honestly, I deserved it. I poured myself a full glass of wine and drank half of it standing right there in the kitchen with my purse still hanging from my shoulder. Better. At least it calmed my nerves a bit. After topping up my glass, I headed to the bathroom to run myself a hot bubble bath with extra bubbles. Before the tub finished filling, my scrubs were in a pile on the floor and I was submerged and soaking as I sipped my wine. I hated the stupid thing I'd done, and as the hot water and the wine did their thing, I tried to convince myself I wasn't a horrible person. Why had I kissed a helpless patient was beyond me. I was sick about it. What had come over me? Well, to be fair, Flynn Bennett wasn't just any patient. Still, no excuses. I couldn't get the kiss off my mind, but I also couldn't forget the look of confusion on his face when Flynn noticed the machines next to him. I should have stayed for a few more minutes. I shouldn't have left him like that, but I really had no business being there. It wasn't my place. I was just the pathetic nurse who had considered a man I didn't know, a man who had been incapable of responding to me, a friend. What if he was frightened? I just fled from him after kissing him awake. Maybe my mother was right about me needing a stronger grip on reality. Maybe I did watch too many old movies and read too many romance novels. Were those even a true depiction of love? In my mind's eye, I pictured studio heads during Hollywood's golden age, probably old guys who smoked cigars, sported dollar signs in their eyes, and barked orders at dashing movie stars and naive young starlets. What would they know about true love? Maybe the romance novelists were on point. I conjured visions of ladies in frilly lace dressing gowns and pink bedroom slippers with kitten heels, pecking at their Smith Corona typewriters while smoking cigarettes in those long holders like Audrey Hepburn had in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Oh, good Lord. My mother was right. I was living in a fantasy world. And I'd kissed a patient. Wait a second. My face broke out in a grin. He'd kissed me back. I sat up straight, sloshing bathwater over the side of the tub. He'd kissed me back. It hadn't hit me until that moment, and when it did, I was filled with a giddy, fluttery feeling, although maybe that was the wine. How many nights had I lain awake, imagining a kiss from Flynn Bennett, knowing it would never happen? But it had. Of course, it wasn't nearly as sexy or passionate as in my dreams, but it had still been amazing. I'd had tingles all the way to the tips of my toes. Feeling only mildly ashamed at that point, I sank back into the water and finished my glass of wine. Hissy Fit strutted into the bathroom and sat at a distance from the spilled water, mean-mugging me. Was it my imagination, or was that a condescending smirk on his face? The cat hated me. I don't need you judging me too, Hissy Fit. I get enough of that from the highbrow Richardsons, thank you very much. He yawned and slunk back out of the bathroom. A few seconds later, he was howling in the kitchen demanding his dinner. I gave up on getting any further relaxation from the bath, got out, got dressed in pajamas, and headed to the kitchen to feed him. After popping a frozen meal in the microwave for myself, I dug my cell out of my purse. I had a missed call and voicemail from my mother. Great. I decided I'd listen to it later, grabbed my laptop off the coffee table, and sank into the couch. Despite telling myself I shouldn't, I opened Google and typed in Flynn's name. Again. Flynn Bennett brought up a number of links, but the first several were about the accident and his subsequent coma. I'd read them all before, but I devoured them again. My stomach wedged in my throat, and I covered my mouth with my hand as I reread the news stories of his accident. The local paper had done a couple of follow-up stories about him, but after that, the links were to older articles from over a decade prior. There, on my laptop screen, were black and white images of a much younger Flynn Bennett who'd served prison time. At 19 years old, Flynn had been charged with the illegal manufacture and distribution of moonshine. I snickered. He'd made moonshine, and sold massive amounts of it too, all before he was 20. He'd been arrested when he attempted to sell a huge shipment to an undercover ATF agent. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to 2 years in prison and $10,000 in fines. After that run-in with the law, he'd been arrested once more for a bar fight in Jacksonville. He'd served 2 months in a county jail for that one. Those 2 crimes had seemingly cemented his reputation as a bad boy. I stared at one of the images, a grainy mugshot of a younger Flynn. His expression was angry, as though he were at war with the world. He wasn't clean-cut even then. His hair was long and his face sported a full beard. His dark eyes were narrowed, and he sneered at the camera. He definitely had the bad boy look down pat. Thinking of what my mother would say if I brought a man like Flynn Bennett to Sunday dinner made me grin. Then I smacked myself on the forehead for even allowing the thought. I had to stop with the Flynn Bennett fantasies. The man was out of my life for good now. It was time for me to drop the crazy obsession. I shut my laptop, tossed it on the couch next to me, and glanced again at the voicemail notification on my phone. Sinking back into the cushions, I groaned. Men like Martin Fink were my reality, not bad boys like Flynn Bennett. Martin had been nice, if I could overlook the dullness and the creepy vibe. Maybe I hadn't given him enough of a chance? He'd worn corduroy trousers and a cable-knit cardigan, with elbow patches on our date. I wondered what Flynn would wear on a date. Not with me, of course. No, not on a date with me, but in general, if he was on a date, what would the felon-turned-garage mechanic who looked like a badass biker wear? Something scorchingly sexy, no doubt. Leather, denim, and bulging muscles. I let my head fall back. Didn't matter what he wore. Flynn Bennett would be released from the hospital, and I would never see him again. Sunkist Key was small, but it was big enough that you could be born on the island and spend your whole life there without knowing someone else who'd also grown up on the island. I'd never go back to the long-term care ward, and I'd make a concerted effort never to think about the man ever again. Right, Arden. Good luck with that. I was beyond grateful that he was finally awake. I'd prayed for it to happen so many times. I was truly overjoyed, truly. Why did I feel such an incredible sense of loss? Because I was selfish, that was why. And because that kiss, even though it was just lip to lip, no tongue action, had been the most exciting kiss I'd ever experienced. As the kiss replayed in my mind, my body flushed and I slapped my hands over my eyes and thought about glaciers and icebergs and frozen tundra. Anything to cool off from the heated frenzy that thoughts of Flynn Bennett put me in. When my cell rang, I had this irrational thought that maybe Flynn was calling, maybe the hospital had given him my number. One glance at my phone, and my heart sank. Martin Fink. I let it go to voicemail. Chapter 5. Arden. I was a day and a half into my withdrawal from Flynn. 3 times already, I'd found myself standing at the elevators prepared to make the trek to long-term care. Each time when I realized that the routine I'd followed for so many months had come to an end, I felt a twinge of sorrow over my loss, which made me feel like a complete selfish ass. The man finally woke up. I should be over the moon, right? As I stepped out of the doors of Sunkist Key Medical Center to head home for the evening, I felt older than my 30 years. When I looked up, I almost had a heart attack. Flynn Bennett was leaning against the side of my car. His arms were crossed and his brow was creased, and he looked sexy as hell. Me, on the other hand, I startled hard, clenched my fist, and squeezed the key fob in my hand. That set off the panic alarm from my car, which startled me even more. I jumped and reflexively flung the keys into the air, only to have them hit me in the face on the way back down, despite the fact that I tried to dodge them by leaning forward and throwing out my left leg and my right arm for balance. Needless to say, it wasn't my most graceful moment. On the upside, I may have discovered a new yoga pose. A few seconds later, the alarm shut off, and Flynn's black boots came into view. My keys rested on his outstretched palm. What could I do but brush my hair out of my eyes, straighten my spine, and pretend the whole thing never happened? I plucked the keys from his hand, inadvertently brushing my fingertips against his skin and sending flutters racing through me. "You okay?" Oh, Jesus. If there were a god of deep, husky voices, he'd certainly blessed Flynn Bennett. Talk about visions of smoky jazz bars and tinkling piano keys. Goosebumps. Full body goosebumps. He was speaking to me. I bit my lip and looked up at him. The man had been breathtaking while horizontal and in a coma, but now that he was awake, alert, and animated, he was so much more. Towering above me a good 10 or so inches, he stared down with a crooked grin. His dark brown eyes crinkled at the corners, and he had a sexy dusting of beard growth. He was 5-alarm blazing hot. My brain fizzled out. I couldn't think. "Are you going to cut your hair?" His deep chuckle tingled all the way down to my toes. "Do you want me to?" "No." I bit my lip harder and swayed. Flynn reached out and took my forearms. His touch burned through my scrubs, and I knew my face was beet red. Flynn stroked his thumb over my arm and stepped closer. "What happened yesterday?" That question shook me off cloud 9 and dumped me back down on earth. I pulled away from him and inched toward my car. "Oh, yeah, that." "Yeah, that." He followed me step for step. The way he moved reminded me of an animal attempting to corner its prey. "How did we meet?" I tried to think of something, anything to say that would make what I'd done sound better, but there was just no easy way out, and I wasn't a liar. It was bad enough that I'd kissed him without his consent. I wasn't about to add to my sins by lying about it. Turning to face him fully, I took a deep breath in. It's embarrassing. For me, not you." His face furrowed in confusion. "Now I really want to hear it." Groaning, I turned and walked the rest of the way to my car. I dropped my bag inside, held on to the door, and just spit it all out. "I had a bad morning yesterday. My mother called, nagging me about, well, it was a bad morning. I happened to be passing by your room, so I stopped to check on you, and there you were, and there I was, and I don't know what came over me. I really don't. I never should have done it. It wasn't right." "You happened to be passing my room?" What was it I told myself about not lying? "Well, okay, it wasn't by chance. I came to your room to see you. I do that a lot. I did that a lot." So back to my question. You were there, and I kissed you. Then you woke up, and I'm so sorry, so very, very sorry. Not the part about you waking up. I'm not sorry about that. That's amazing, and I'm very happy for you. I don't know what came over me. I mean, sure, you're hot and all, but it was more than that. I meant to kiss you on the cheek. I swear to you, I've never done that before." "You think I'm hot?" There was that sexy half grin again. "Oh, please, you know you're hot. Anyway, I meant to kiss your cheek, and when I bent over, I started to think of Sleeping Beauty and how Prince Charming kissed her awake, and it's so stupid, but I kissed you." "So you're my Prince Charming. Is that what I'm getting here?" "No, I mean, yeah, I guess. I kissed you, and you woke up. That's not the point, though. The point is that I am apologizing. What I did was wrong, and it shouldn't have happened." He moved closer to me, his eyes darkening. "Sweetheart, don't apologize for kissing me. For that, I consider myself a lucky man. And just so we're clear, from here on out, you have an open invitation to kiss me anytime, anywhere." Those words, combined with his deep, sensual voice, sent shivers through me. He sounded a lot like Sam Elliott in Roadhouse. I was thrilled he wasn't upset, but I didn't want him to think I went around kissing patients. I looked down at my feet. It was a one-time thing, I can assure you. I mean, if I thought kissing comatose patients magically woke them up, I'd be doing it all over the place, but I don't have any magical power that I know of. I think it was a coincidence. I kissed you at the same time you happened to wake up, and I'm so sorry. I looked up, way up at him, and nodded. Tell you what, I think I know how to make us even. Before I knew what he was doing, his arm was around my waist, pulling me against his chest, and his lips were descending over mine. I was thrown off balance, clutching his shirt in both fists, hanging on for dear life as my mind scrambled to catch up. Flynn Bennett was kissing me. My lips parted with a moan, and he took the opportunity to dip his tongue inside and slide it against mine. He tasted like dark chocolate and maleness, a flavor that turned the blood in my veins to pure liquid fire. With his arms locked around me, he squeezed me tighter, molding me to his huge body. I felt the hard planes of his stomach, the firm muscles of his thighs, and I damn sure couldn't ignore the hard length that was digging into my stomach. It felt huge. I knew it would be. He pulled his mouth away slightly, leaving only a breath between our lips as he stared deeply into my eyes for several long moments. The deep brown of his irises looked almost golden, as if they were glowing. His hand caressed my cheek, and he ran his thumb over my jaw. I felt the beating of his heart, the exhale of his breath, and a low rumbling sound that came from his chest. Or maybe it was a buzzing from the back of his throat. Not quite even yet. I melted into him as he kissed me again, slower this time, a teasing, thorough exploration of the corners of my mouth, my chin, my Cupid's bow. He ran his thumb over my bottom lip, and my tongue darted out to taste his skin. Fuck. His mouth crashed over mine, devouring me hungrily. Pressed against my car, pinned by his body, I clung to him weakly as he sucked, nibbled, and nipped my lips. His fingers wrapped themselves into my hair, angling my head to kiss me more deeply. I moaned, weak-kneed, while he peppered little biting kisses along my jaw and down my throat. His teeth dragged roughly across my skin, sending shivers shooting down to my clit. I twisted my hips against him, needing something more. Come home with me. His deep, raspy voice was like pouring gasoline on my already raging bonfire. I was on the verge of saying yes to anything at all, when his cell phone rang loudly, yanking me out of the lust fog. My body stiffened against him, and I realized that we were standing in the parking lot of the medical center. He ignored his phone, but I pushed at his chest until he let me slip out of his grasp. I stepped to the side, out from between him and my car, and backed away a few steps, trying to put space between us. I can't. I mean, we hardly know each other, and, well, yeah, you're hot and all, but I'm just not into one-night stands. He made a face. Who said anything about one night? As we stared, unblinking, into each other's eyes, I swear I felt my vagina clench. If there was one thing I knew, it was that Flynn Bennett was not the kind of man who would be described as safe or secure or boring. Dangerous, maybe. Passionate? Hell yeah. That kiss had made my toes curl. Flynn was an awesome fantasy, but he was just that, a fantasy. He and I didn't add up. He might give me the ride of my life, but afterward, I was the one who would suffer. I was the one who would get hurt, and that was reality. His cell rang again, but he continued to ignore it, staring into my eyes as though he was waiting for an answer. I took one more step back, and Flynn lunged forward, grabbing me and pulling me against his hard body just as a car sped by. I gasped and let him hold me against him for a second longer. That car had almost hit me. Trembling, I took a moment to get my breathing under control before I pulled away from him. Flynn tried to stop me, but when I dove into my car, started it, and put it in gear, he had little choice. He stood watching as I closed the door and backed out. He continued to stand there, watching as I sped off. On the short drive home, I replayed the whole scene in my head, trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. By the time I pulled in my driveway, I was thoroughly regretting not taking Flynn up on his offer. Offers like that from guys like him to girls like me didn't come around but once in a lifetime. After a glass of wine, a bubble bath, and another Google search, I changed my mind. I was having a hard enough time dropping my Flynn Bennett obsession. The last thing I needed to do was exacerbate it by sleeping with the guy. I did the right thing, the only thing, to preserve my sanity. Chapter 6. Flynn. I watched Arden pull out of the parking lot and forced myself not to chase her. She evidently needed to accept us in her own time and at her own pace. I knew she was as aroused as I was. It was obvious she didn't know about mates, or she wouldn't have fought the attraction like she did. It made me wonder if she knew about shifters at all. I'd estimate less than 20% of the population of the Florida Keys was aware that shifters existed. Arden was human, so it was plausible that she was one of the 80 or so % of those unaware. That meant she had no clue what was going on between us. A slow smile spread across my face. Arden was even better than I expected. I always thought that whoever invented scrubs must have set out to design the least flattering items of clothing in existence. I changed my mind. Arden made them look sexy as fuck. No way they could hide her plump, squeezable curves. The second I saw her crossing the parking lot, the blood in my body rushed to my cock so fast I got lightheaded. Then she opened her mouth. I was too old, too hardened to get a hard-on for a random chick anymore, no matter how hot she was. But when Arden spoke, everything about her, her expression, her tone of voice, the nervous stutter, everything was sweet as sugar. She apologized for kissing me. Shit. As though I'd mind. That kind of thing was new to me. Everything about a woman like Arden was new to me. She was exciting. She made my pulse race and my blood run hot. I usually dated a trashier type of woman. It wasn't that I was more attracted to that type. It was that they were more on my level. They had no qualms about fucking a guy with a criminal past, a guy who spent his days as a grease monkey fixing cars and his nights drinking beer and watching old Hollywood classics on Amazon Prime. I'd never been much of a hound dog when it came to chicks anyway. But a single man had needs, and so did a single woman. I indulged in the occasional no-strings hookup once in a while, a you scratch my itch, I'll scratch yours kind of thing. Not often. The older I got, the less enjoyable I found hooking up just for a sexual release. After kissing sweet Arden with the soft lips and sexy curves, those days were over. There were no other women. Any woman I may have known carnally in the past was now a distant, faded memory. Arden was everything. It was just a matter of time before I told her what we were. Maybe I could show her first. Running a hand down my face, I laughed. It was probably best to put my life back together first. I hopped on my motorcycle and sat there for a minute, trying to will my dick to soften. Otherwise, it was going to be a mighty uncomfortable ride. My brain had melted about the same time my mate had stepped out of the front doors of the medical center. There was something I was supposed to be doing, though. Right on cue, my cell rang again, and Simon's name popped up on the caller ID. Grunting, I answered. Yeah? I've been trying to call you. You're late. I hung up and started the bike. That's what I had to do. Meet fucking Simon. I'd known I was going to stop to see Arden first, though. I'd planned to blow Simon off if things went well with my mate, and I had really been hoping they would. Fucking Simon. He and I were business partners in a beverage distributorship we'd started years before. We weren't exactly friends. His absence from the hospital while I'd been knocked out wasn't a big surprise, but it did establish the fact that we would never be friends. We'd found each other after I got out of jail the second time. I was still making my own liquor then, running it up north of the Keys. Simon had been looking for something to get involved in, and he'd helped me turn the business legit. As a convicted felon, I'd found it nearly impossible to get licensing as a wholesale liquor distributor. That's where Simon came in. We owned the distributorship jointly, and licensing was issued in his name. I'd spent years working on the liquor business while still running the shop. I'd worked my ass off, and it had paid off. My shop had steady business, and the distributorship had recently snowballed, with meetings in place for more distribution deals. All that was before the accident. I wasn't sure how hard it was going to be to get my shop up and running again and get back to having a steady stream of clients, and I had no idea what was going on with the distributorship. Simon damn well better have kept those meetings and held it together. I'd worked too damn hard. I sped down Main Street, cutting a sharp left onto Palm Street, and then a right onto Parrot Cove Road. At the end of the street, on West Public Beach, was Bayfront Diner. I'd been going to the place on and off since I was a snot-nosed kid. Susie, the owner, had been in my life since I was barely old enough to see over the lunch counter. There were plenty of times back then when she'd slip me a hot meal on the house, and plenty of times when, if she hadn't, I'd have gone hungry. I parked and strolled inside, spotting Simon immediately in a corner at the back of the diner. I nodded to him but went to find Susie first. A tiny Asian woman with thick glasses was at the counter ringing someone up. She looked up, spotted me, and smiled politely. I sniffed the air surreptitiously. Polar bear. Not her, but she smelled like one of the polar bears that had recently relocated to the island. Susie around? She eyed me up and down, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Nope, can I help you? Odd. Susie was always at her diner. If the place was open, Susie was here. Something wasn't right. What do you mean she's not here? Her narrowed eyes flashed with stubbornness. I mean just what I said. No, if there's something you want, I'll help you. I tried not to laugh. She was about 100 pounds soaking wet. I was probably 3 or 4 times her size, but she held her ground. Oh, dear Lord, come here, boy. Let me have a look at you. Susie emerged from the kitchen in a wheelchair, slowly rolling it with arms that were thinner than I'd ever seen them. Her whole body was frail, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in the last 6 months. She waved the younger woman off. It's all right, Kerrigan. Kerrigan did not look like it was all right. You promised. You said that if I brought you in, you'd rest in the back and not wear yourself out trying to micromanage the staff or chat with the customers. You're supposed to be taking it easy. Doctor's orders. Susie scowled, so Kerrigan turned to me. She had a stroke several months ago. The doctor says if she follows orders and doesn't tire herself out too much, she should make a full recovery. But trying to get her to listen is like shoveling snow off Mount Everest. I've been in bed for too long. Besides, this is my Flynn, the miracle man who awoke from a 6-month coma. I bent down, wrapping my arms around her and hugged her tight. Then I smiled and planted a kiss on her cheek. Hey, Susie. She tried to blink back tears, but one fell down her pale cheek anyway. I'm so sorry, Flynn. I leaned against the counter and looked her over. She looked like she'd been through hell, and it tugged at my heartstrings. My tiger was agitated about her state, too. He had a special fondness for the woman who'd been slipping him cinnamon rolls since he was a cub. What in the world are you sorry for? She wiped her eyes, and I glanced over at Simon, who was alternately grimacing my way and scowling at the table. Let him wait. I'm sorry I didn't come and see you these last 6 months. When I heard about the accident, I planned to come up to the medical center and sit with you. Then I got sicker and ended up there anyway, only it wasn't for a visit. I bent down and hugged her again. I was sleeping. What good would it have done? You know I love you, no matter what. Talk to me about what's going on with you, though. By the time I got over to Simon, he was red in the face and had ripped the paper napkin into about 1,000 pieces. He frowned at me, and when I sat down across from him, seemed to struggle to arrange his face into something vaguely resembling a smile. I have other things to do, Flynn. I shrugged. Let's make this short and sweet, then. What's the status of the business? With a bitter laugh, he shook his head. It's not ours anymore." A growl escaped my lips as I leaned closer. "What exactly do you mean it's not ours?" "Oh, don't worry, worked out great for you." He paused while the tiny waitress Kerrigan slid a plate of peach cobbler in front of me. She smiled at me, and this time the smile was genuine. "On the house." I returned the smile and looked past her to see Susie wave at me from behind the counter. "Tell her she's going to make me fat." Simon leaned in closer after Kerrigan left. "Before I continue, I want you to understand that the accident almost killed you. We all thought it had killed you, and that you were just clinging on stubbornly for a few extra months. The doctors all said." My growl shut him up and he swallowed audibly. "What do you mean it's not ours?" You were holed up in a hospital bed withering away and the business was too much for me to run alone." "What did you do?" My voice had grown so loud he flinched. "I was approached by a party who showed serious interest, and with our new distribution deals in place, I didn't sign." I remembered that as being one of the last things that happened before the accident. "I never signed the paperwork for the deal." Simon shifted in his seat. "Well, that's where things get a little murky. With you being down for the count and all, I knew that if you had some time to think it over, you'd see the benefit. It was a sweet deal. There was no way you could decline that, so You signed for me?" I raised my voice and drew the eyes of people around the diner. Simon's face turned even redder. "You want to scream that a little louder?" "Maybe. What else did you do, asshole?" He nervously took a gulp of the coffee in front of him and met my eyes. "Well, once the distribution deals were in place, we were approached by Lighthouse Beverage out of Atlanta with a top-notch offer, one that was impossible to refuse." "Which legally you had to refuse without my signature." "Again, after some wheeling and dealing, I knew it was a decision you would have made yourself, had you been able-bodied and all." He cleared his throat and held his hand in front of him. "Before you rip my head off, and I can see that you want to, I got us enough money for both of us to retire as millionaires. One of us still will." I grabbed the collar of his shirt and yanked him closer to me. "What the fuck did you do?" "I sold the company, all right? Don't hurt me. You're a rich man, Flynn. From rags to riches, literally." He yanked himself free and stood up. $3.2 million is your share. It's sitting in the company account waiting for you. It's all there, Flynn, I swear it. Every penny. The felon ends up with millions, and I ended up with nothing after a few bad investments. Fucking figures." I took a deep breath and glared at Simon. "I don't want to see your face around here again. Do you understand? Ever." Simon might have been a bit on the slimy side, but he was no dummy. He got the hell out of there so fast he knocked over a chair on the way out. I sat for a while as my rage slowed from a boil to a simmer and then began to cool. It wasn't right what he did, selling the business, especially for a measly $6.5 million. I'd had plans to turn it into a distributorship worth twice that, but no use crying over spilled beer. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I had to get the shop back in shape, and I wanted to spend time getting to know my mate. I was still stewing when a pint-sized powerhouse with purple hair, tattoos, and facial piercings came storming up to my table and sat herself down in the seat opposite me. Parker Pettit. I knew her from the sun-kissed public school system, before I dropped out, and I'd seen her around the island here and there. She'd been a grade behind me at Gasparilla Junior High and was also a shifter. Parker wore the same look of determination she always had, only today it appeared amped up a bit. My hackles really rose when she flashed a syrupy smile. "Well, hello, Flynn." "Parker, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I wasn't sure yet whether I could call her plopping her ass in the seat across from me a pleasure, but I figured I'd give her the benefit of the doubt. "I heard about your accident. Glad to see you're up and around. You look good." I raised a brow, then slowly thanked her. "Why do I feel like you have an agenda up your sleeve?" "Okay, you got me. I came to sign you up for a deal of a lifetime." "Another offer I can't refuse. Been a rash of those lately?" How would you like to live the life of your wildest dreams, your deepest fantasies?" "The fuck you talking about, Parker? Spit it out." Sheesh, the woman sounded like she was trying to sell me a subscription to a porn site. "Cybermates." She held her hands out in a ta-da gesture. "Cybermates?" "It's my new online mate matching service, and you are perfect for it. The only reason I didn't ask sooner is, well, you know." "You are definitely out of your mind." "Come on, Flynn. Don't you want to meet your mate? Here's the application packet. Think it over. Fill it out. I'll stop by your shop and pick it up later in the week." She tossed a stack of papers in front of me, and I slid them right back in front of her. "I don't need an application, and I don't need to think it over. What I needed was to win my mate over." She slid the papers in front of me again. "At least think about it." I slid them back. "I don't need to. I already found my mate." Her brow furrowed. "You did?" I did. "Oh." A smug smile spread over her face as she sat back, crossing her arms over her chest. "Damn, I'm good at this." Chapter 7. Arden. I had the weekend off, so I was thinking that maybe I would do a little self-pampering, something that would make me look more put together, for work. It had nothing to do with Flynn Bennett or that kiss. Nothing at all to do with that kiss. I would probably never see Flynn again. I certainly had no reason to. Although, there was the chance I might randomly run into him. Growing up on the island hadn't meant for me what it had for the other locals. I hadn't attended the local public schools. I'd been driven to the mainland to Fuller Academy, an exclusive private school. I didn't know a lot of other locals my age, unless, of course, they'd given birth at Sun-Kissed Key Medical Center in the last 5 years. My parents were of the opinion that Sun-Kissed Key was where we lived, not where we played, and my mother had always taken us girls to a high-priced salon in Miami. As an adult, I just continued going where I'd always gone, which was why, although I'd passed Jammy Salon countless times, I'd never set foot inside. As I stepped into the salon for the first time, I was momentarily taken aback. The decor was fun and frolicky, and much of the staff seemed to be composed of older women with brightly colored hair. A woman with hot pink hair approached wearing a friendly smile. "Well, hello there. How can we help you?" "Hi, I'm Arden Richardson. I have an appointment with Layla." She nodded and pointed to a gorgeous woman with white blonde hair and killer shoes. Manolo Blahniks, if I wasn't mistaken. "Right over there, honey. I think she's all ready for you." As I approached Layla, I knew I'd seen her somewhere before, but it took me a few minutes to place where. When she turned, I remembered. She was a friend of Parker Pettit's. She'd visited in the maternity ward when Parker gave birth. I didn't know if she remembered me. As soon as she saw me, though, a look of recognition came over her face. "Arden!" I nodded. "You remembered. You helped deliver my goddaughter, Stella. Of course I remember." She motioned me over to sit in her chair, then draped a cape over the front of me. A younger woman next to us, with black hair, which was color-coordinated to match her black lipstick and black nail polish, laughed. "Where is Parker today? She's usually in here once or twice a day ever since she quit working at the B&B. Oh, let me guess, she's off wheeling and dealing, recruiting members for that site of hers?" "No, she's shopping in Miami. It's date night with Maxim tonight, and she wanted to hit up Bernadette's boudoir for some lingerie." I was wondering what she meant by that sight of Parker's when Layla turned my chair so it faced the mirror and caught my eye through it. "Parker has an online dating site. She's a little obsessed, but she's made some good matches. Me, for one." "Sure, she matched you and Fern, but she hasn't matched me yet, and I keep asking. She just screws up her face at me in a weird way when I ask." "Because you're too young, October." Layla held up a firm hand to cut off the objection she seemed to know was coming. "You are. You're barely 20. You have a whole life to live before you settle down. You're starting to sound like Jammy and the other Golden Girls around here." "Who are you calling Golden Girls, October?" The hot pink-haired woman wagged her finger. I'm just reaching my prime. One of the other 70-somethings, the one with a blue streak through her spiky white hair, barked a laugh. Prime? Ha ha! When she was a girl, the Dead Sea was only sick. Oh, that's hilarious, Margie. But she's here all week, folks. Don't forget to tip your waiters. And try the veal. October wasn't deterred. All I'm saying is Parker could easily set me up with someone. No extreme kinks, weird fetishes, or pump and dumps, just someone with a cute butt. October glanced in the mirror at her client, a tiny old woman with a sparse, wispy white cloud of hair. Am I right, Lucille? Lucille nodded empathetically. Oh, yes, dear. I love a tight butt. Layla laughed and met my eyes in the mirror, shaking her head. Ignore these crazies. I enjoyed the interactions of the women. Seems like a fun place to work. Do you know what you want? Layla ran her hand through my hair, feeling the texture and finger combing it. If not, I can suggest a couple of things that I think would be nice. I twisted my lips to the side, considering her question. I want something different, better. I do different and I do better. Layla grinned. How about color? Any change? Because I would suggest shorter with blonde highlights. How much shorter? Layla leaned down and held my nervous gaze. I promise you that I won't do anything drastic. Yeah, but how much shorter? Holding up a strand of my hair, she folded it and held the much shorter piece next to my face. It fell to just under my jaw, almost long enough to graze the top of my shoulders. I blew out a breath and shrugged. I did say different. After a few more questions, she spun the chair away from the mirror and got to work. October, Layla, and the other ladies carried on a riotous exchange that at times was a lot like verbal sparring. They had a camaraderie that was comfortable and put me at ease. And then, it happened. Did y'all hear about that guy who woke up from a long coma? The question was posed almost offhandedly by Jammy's client, a middle-aged woman leafing through a People magazine. I felt my cheeks heat and glanced toward the door, like I expected Flynn to come walking in. I waited to see if anyone had anything interesting to say about him. Flynn Bennett. October let out a breathy sigh. Hottie with a body. He can look under my hood. October. He's too old for you. Layla rolled her eyes. God, I sound stuffy. Flynn is too old for you, though. He was a year or two older than Parker and me in school, and he was in prison after that. Gotta love those bad boys. October fanned herself. Bet he'd do some filthy things in bed, things that would make a girl's toes curl. He can talk dirty to me any day or night. If October knew what was good for her, she'd shut her trap. I was about ready to rip a bitch's head off. I guess he woke up after being out for 6 months. Layla wrapped a piece of foil around a strand of my hair. If anyone could wake up after a 6-month coma, it would be Flynn. He's a survivor. I didn't want to seem too eager for info, but I had to know. What do you mean? Rough childhood, from what I remember. I don't really know much, but I do remember he dropped out of school, and I think I heard he was on the street for a time. A black woman with short copper curls nodded. Mm-hmm. He was always getting into trouble as a boy. October's right, though. He is as hot as a bonfire in July. Wonder if Parker will get her hands on him for that website of hers. Layla turned the chair and picked up another foil. Oh, I don't think he's single. My jaw dropped, and I felt a rush of blood to my head. You don't? What makes you think that? Just curious. Parker said something about trying to hit him up the other day, but he told her he's already got someone. Of course, Parker takes full credit for the match. Suddenly, my discomfort had nothing to do with October drooling over Flynn and everything to do with the gossip that had just come out of Layla's mouth. Flynn wasn't single? Layla seemed oblivious to my sudden mood swing. All right, I've got the color on. Now I'm going to sit you under the dryer for a time while we wait for it to set." I sat under the dryer, worrying my lip and working my hands together under the cape. Maybe Flynn just told Parker that to get her off his back. And maybe it's none of my business. I blew out a sharp breath. I was still avoiding Martin, but I supposed I really needed to give more consideration to another date with him. It could serve a dual purpose, to get my mother off my back and to get Flynn off my mind. Chapter 8. Flynn. I was in the shop replacing a leaky valve cover when I pulled my head out from under the hood of my '67 Mustang. There was something. I took a deep breath and snapped my head in the direction of the business caddy corner to my shop on Main Street. My feet followed the scent, and I stepped out of the garage to see Arden emerging from Jammy's salon. My breath hitched, and my face broke out in an enormous grin. I shoved the rag I'd been wiping my greasy hands on into my back pocket and watched her walk the few feet to where her car was parked at the curb. She stood on the sidewalk, digging through her purse. Her hair fell into her eyes, and she hastily tucked it behind her ears. God damn, she made me feel like a teenage boy unable to get control of my dick. But who could blame little Flynn for standing at attention? She was fucking beautiful. I hadn't gotten the full picture before. When I first saw her in the hospital room, I could barely focus my eyes, and then in the parking lot of the medical center, she was there and gone before I could get my fill. Hell, I'd never get my fill. I could stare at her all day, every day, 24/7, forever. I watched her lift her knee to rest her purse on her leg as she continued to search. Black yoga pants were painted on her squeezable thighs and plump ass, and the simple t-shirt she wore did nothing to hide the mouth-watering swell of her breasts. I wanted to taste every inch of the soft curves hiding beneath, and my feet ate up the distance between us. When she heard me approach, her head jerked up and her mouth fell open in a sexy little O. To keep her from running off like she did last time, I forced myself to stop a few feet away and shove my hands in my pockets. Then I flashed my most charming smile. "What?" I wasn't able to hide my perusal of her figure as I scanned her up and down, nor could I hide my arousal, and I was sure there was a visible cock bulge in the front of my jeans. Her hair was different, shorter, and it curled slightly just under her jaw. No makeup. Her lips were ripe and plump. I watched her pupils dilate slightly in her beautiful hazel eyes as she stared back at me. "I was just thinking about you, and you showed up a couple of doors away from my shop as though I conjured you up out of thin air. That's fate, right?" Truth was, I hadn't stopped thinking about her since I woke up from the coma. Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered her eyes and looked back into her purse, this time rifling through it much more slowly. "I was getting my hair done." "I see that. It's beautiful." I stepped closer to her and ran 2 fingers lightly down a strand that framed her face. Her cheeks colored with a pink tinge and she dropped her purse. When things tumbled out of it and scattered all over the sidewalk, we both knelt to pick them up. I grabbed a tube of chapstick, earbuds, 2 quarters, and a wadded-up Kleenex. As she reached for a pen that had rolled into the street, I was struck by how she just got more breathtaking the closer I got. I pushed her hair back behind her ear and ran my thumb over her jaw. "God damn, you're so fucking beautiful." She looked up at me, surprise written all over her. "Stop." I let out an unexpected laugh and pulled her to her feet. "Go out with me tonight." She bit her lip and her eyes strayed to where I held her forearms, my thumb casually stroking her skin. Her body swayed closer to mine, but she stiffened and pulled back. "I can't." "Tomorrow night?" "I can't then either." "The night after?" She grinned for a second before shaking her head and grabbing her keys from her purse. "I'm not sure that's such a good idea." "Sweetheart, it's a great idea. A fucking fantastic idea. I promise. It's the best idea I've ever had, actually." I placed a feather-light kiss on her temple, and she sucked in a sharp breath, then turned a heated gaze up at me. Her lip was tucked between her teeth, and it looked like she was fighting to keep from touching me. I'd never seen anything so sexy in my life. I moved my hand to her waist and stroked her side. Give me a list of why you think it's not a good idea, and we can debate the pros and cons of each reason on the list. This isn't a debate club. And you're lucky it's not. I was captain of the debate team. She frowned. Really? Laughing, I shook my head. Not at all, but when I really, really want something, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Flynn Bennett, what the hell is going on? Hey, whoever you are, get the hell away from my man. I winced at the shriek while Arden jerked away from me as fast as she could. I glanced back at Tiff, the pain in the ass. She was becoming a stalker. She moved into my apartment while I was in the hospital, and I found her living there when I got home. I should have called the fucking cops. I would have, except cops and I don't mix well. The craziest part was, although we'd had a couple of casual hookups before the accident, I'd never had her up to my place before, never so much as invited her through the door. I told her that night in no uncertain terms to get the fuck out and stay out. Growling low in my chest, I shook my head at her, thoroughly regretting that I didn't have her ass arrested for trespassing. Why she was stomping over to me, looking like she had a claim on me, was beyond my comprehension. Thought I told you to get going and stay gone. Who the fuck is this, Flynn? She jabbed a sharp 2-inch fingernail in Arden's direction. Is this your side bitch? Watch your mouth. I bit the words out between clenched teeth and turned to explain to Arden that Tiff was out of her fucking mind, but Arden had already unlocked and opened her car door and was getting in. Arden, this isn't... Yeah, that's right. Gone, bitch. This here's my baby daddy. You go find yourself another one, maybe at the country club? Tiff tried to get closer to Arden, but I put myself between them and growled louder at the woman. Hey, psycho stalker, I am not your man, and if you really are pregnant, I sure as shit ain't the daddy. The sound of Arden's car starting added fuel to my burning anger. I turned and spotted her lower lip tremble as she pulled out of her parking spot and headed north on Main Street. She didn't look back. Swinging around to Tiff, I held up my hands and skirted around her. You are fucking nuts, you know that? I had never hit a woman before, and I could say, in all honesty, that right then was the first time in my entire life I ever wanted to. Flynn, this baby's yours, I told you. Why don't you believe me? She followed after me, clutching the back of my shirt and whining. I inhaled deeply. Sure enough, she was pregnant. It was faint, but I scented a baby growing inside her. Definitely not my baby. She had a slightly extended abdomen, very slightly. The woman wasn't a day over 4 months pregnant. The reason I don't believe you is that I'm not a fucking moron. There's nothing between you and me, and there won't ever be anything between you and me. That woman that just drove off is my future wife. No matter what shit you try to pull, that's a fact. Give it up. She scowled. You're not shafting me on child support. No way. You do know that paternity tests exist, right? It'll be pretty simple to prove that the child's not mine. I slammed the shop doors closed and locked them before heading for my Harley. Don't come back here, I mean it. I don't want anything to do with you, Tiff. I doubted she actually wanted anything to do with me either, except maybe as a meal ticket. You're a real son of a bitch, you know that? A real son of a bitch. As I straddled my Harley, she slapped me hard across the face and backed away when the bike roared to life. Just so you know, I was fucking Simon the entire time you were away. I laughed. Now we know whose kid it is. No wonder you're trying to bark up my tree. You heard he blew through all his dough. Fuck you, Flynn Bennett. Fuck you. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward Pelican Drive. As far as I was concerned, Tiff didn't exist. She was nothing to me now. She hadn't been anything to me before the accident either, except a rare hookup. I had never let myself get close to any woman before, and if I had, it wouldn't have been her. Tiff was on the arm of a different guy every night. She worked whomever she could get something out of. I didn't care if she fucked Simon, or the entire island for that matter. I'd seen her around with lots of guys, never bothered me in the least. Thanks to her, though, I now had a lot of explaining to do to the one woman I did care about and who did mean something to me. Arden probably wouldn't understand. Who could blame her? I knew where Arden lived. I would never tell her, but I scented her out immediately after leaving the meeting with Simon at the diner. I'd had to. My tiger wouldn't rest unless he knew. I was doing a decent job of not overwhelming Arden with the whole mate thing. Lord knew I didn't want her to think of me as a stalker, but I couldn't sleep at night unless I first made sure she was safe. I checked up on her after dark to make sure her place was secure and that there was no scent of danger around the area. Parking the Harley in front of her house, I hopped up the front steps and knocked on the door. Arden's eyes grew wide as soon as she opened the door, but she didn't look furious. That was a good sign. She did look sad, and that sliced me like a razor. I held my hands up in front of me. I'm sorry that happened. I'm just here to ask you for a chance to tell my side of it. I can explain if you'll let me, if you'll just hear me out, please. Chapter 9. Arden. The second I opened my front door and saw Flynn standing there, my knees went weak and my brain turned to mush. Had he followed me? Why? What did it matter to him if I walked away and out of his life? On a hotness scale of 1 to 10, the man was a 12. He couldn't possibly care how I felt. In his eyes, I'd never been anything to him. I'd never been a significant part of his life. He was the one who'd been a significant part of mine. All I could do was stare up at him, speechless. Flynn didn't wait to be invited in. He gently took hold of both my upper arms and walked us backward into the house. He reached back and closed the door with his foot. Then I found myself being pulled into my own living room by a man who technically had no business even being there, especially considering that he had a girlfriend and a baby on the way. A stabbing pain pierced my chest at the realization. I had to get rid of him. This wasn't right. He couldn't be here. I don't think this is such a good idea, you being here. You need to leave. Will you listen to me first, please? If you still want me to leave after hearing me out, I will, I promise. I pulled my arms out of his grip and wrapped them tightly around my stomach, turning away from him slightly. All of a sudden, my living room looked different. I envisioned it through the eyes of someone who had never seen it before and wondered what they thought of it. The throw pillows were flat and the Afghan was on the floor. I wondered what he was used to. What kind of women did he usually date? Well, the woman who just confronted us was slender with painted-on jeans, heavy makeup, a teeny-tiny crop top, and high-heeled sandals. Guess that was his type. Flynn and I were from different worlds. He probably thought I was incredibly uptight and stuffy. I opened my mouth to tell him so, but that's not what came out. You didn't cut your hair. Why'd I say that? You told me not to. You like my hair? He flashed a cocky grin. My cheeks heated. I don't know why I said that. I used to brush it. It's silly. It's not silly. Not at all. I wish I could tell you how much that means to me. He cupped my cheek. I'll never cut it again. Not unless you tell me to. Oh, sweet Jesus. I grabbed a pillow off the couch and started to fluff it before tossing it back. I grabbed another and did the same thing. Arden. I looked back at Flynn and frowned. Why are you here? Tiff, that woman, is not my girlfriend, Arden, and she never was. The kid she's carrying is definitely not my baby. I can tell you that with absolute certainty. He must have seen my astonished look because he rushed on. There was never anything serious between us. I mean, come on. If there were, don't you think she would have maybe visited me while I was in the hospital? He had a point. He was right about her not visiting, at least as far as I knew. Well, why would she do that then? Why come at me all confrontational like that? I really don't know. She's crazy. And the fact that I'm wasting time talking about her when we could be talking about you is really fucking irritating. She is nothing. I tilted my head to the side and frowned more deeply. Technically, I'm nothing. What? You don't know me. I don't really even know you. You want to talk crazy? I just sat by your bed and visited with you and made up this whole fairy tale in my mind that we were friends. But we're not friends. We don't even know each other. Plus, I acted like a super creep and kissed you while you were in a coma." He was silent for several seconds. He looked as though he was contemplating something. Then his eyes narrowed and a brow shot up. "Would you like to be friends?" He had me there. What could I say? In my book, if someone asked if you wanted to be friends unless they'd done something immoral or offensive, to decline was just mean, hurtful even. I mean, sure, Flynn was a felon, ex-felon who served his time, and he was a biker type, and we were from different sides of the tracks, but who was I to pass judgment? I didn't judge people based on the circumstances they were born into. I knew full well that growing up surrounded by a cushion of wealth and privilege did not make you any better than someone who grew up with the deck stacked against them. Sure, we can be friends." "Just friends?" He waggled his eyebrows. "Don't push it, Flynn Bennett." His face grew serious. "I love the way my name sounds sliding out from between your lips." His gaze strayed to my mouth and stayed there for several seconds. "I'm warning you, sweetheart. I'm going to take this newly formed friendship of ours and make you fall in love with me." My heart fluttered in my chest. The man didn't have far to go for that. I was already madly in lust with him. But why the hell did he want that? It wasn't that I had a low opinion of myself. It was just that he and I didn't seem to add up. Then a light bulb went off, and I knew what was going on. "Look, Flynn, I know you think that you and I are a good idea, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's the mama and duckling phenomenon." "Mama and duckling? What the huh?" "When a baby duck comes out of its shell, it latches on to the first creature it sees and follows it around as though that creature is its mama. Like, if it sees a human first instead of a duck, bam, the human is its mama, or so it thinks. But really, we both know that's not the case because its mama is a duck, not a human. I'm just the first person you saw when you woke up, so..." I flipped my hand over in a "you get my meaning, don't make me spell it out here" gesture. Flynn threw his head back and roared with laughter. "Oh, Jesus, that's good." He stepped closer to me, still chuckling, wiping tears from his eyes. "Arden, you really are sweet as sugar. Listen, sweetheart, I'm not a duck. I'm a tiger." His eyes raked over my body in a gaze so heated, I blushed. "And I'm damn sure not looking at you like a child looks at its mama." I turned and started fluffing the pillows again. I picked up the Afghan, folded it, and smoothed it over the back of the couch. I noticed the rug needed vacuuming too. "I just meant that you probably think I'm someone special because I'm the first person you saw when you came out of your coma." "I do think you're special, but that's not why. You're special because you're kind, caring, nurturing, and helpful. In fact, I think you're amazing." I rolled my eyes, finally recovering a bit from the initial shock of him showing up at my front door. "Exaggerate much?" He caught my wrist and all but yanked me into his chest. Staring down at me, breathing heavily, he bared his teeth before leaning forward and dragging them down the side of my throat. The wave of pleasure that hit me was something akin to the tension right before a massive orgasm. I sucked in a sharp breath and grabbed the front of his shirt in an attempt to keep myself upright. How he did that to me was a total mystery. My core pulsed and I felt my heart beating against his chest, perfectly in sync with the hard beating of his. "Flynn." He lowered his mouth to my neck again and sucked on my sensitive skin there. Each pull of his mouth was like a stroke to the damp, pulsing folds between my thighs. When a loud knock on the front door echoed through the house, I jumped back out of his arms. Glancing toward the door, I swore under my breath and straightened my shirt. "We're not finished here, friend." Even a foot of space between us gave me a little more clarity. "Yes, we are. You really should go." "No." "What?" "You can't just say no. This is my house." I placed my palms flat on his lower back and pushed him toward the door. You don't get to be bossy in my house. Then let's go to mine. I'll be bossy there. I'll even let you be bossy for a while if that's your thing. He swung around and gripped my waist with both hands, lifting me in the air and laughing when I squeaked. You got a little naughty dominatrix in you, sweetheart? Put me down! When he did, I yanked open the door and found myself face to face with my mother. I knew my eyes went wide and my mouth fell open, but I couldn't help it. The timing could not have been worse. There, on one side of the threshold, stood Marguerite Richardson in all her pretentious glory. She was staring past me to the man on the other side of the threshold, island bad boy Flynn Bennett. Mom's eyes narrowed on him, and I noticed her upper lip curl ever so slightly. Her hands fell from their position on her hips, dropping in front of her and clasping together in a sign I recognized. She was fighting to keep her temper in check. Flynn was not at all concerned that a woman who could verbally eviscerate him was staring at him with what would have undoubtedly been an ugly scowl had her face not harbored so much Botox. No, Flynn could not have cared less. He leaned down and ran his nose over the shell of my ear. I'll make you feel real good, bossy. I slapped away his hands that had found their way to my waist again. Well, Arden Danielle? Middle name. Despite the phony sweetness of her voice, Mom was pissed. The viper fangs were out. Flynn made a low humming sound in his chest. It was barely audible, but it didn't stop me from stepping on his toes in an attempt to get him to stop. The noise itself didn't bother me, but my body's reaction to it, the rush of moisture seeping into my panties. Aren't you going to introduce me to your guest? I could practically see right up Mom's nostrils with the way she held her nose so high in the air. She said guest like she was fighting the gag reflex. Of course, a woman of Marguerite Richardson's social standing would never vomit. Flynn cupped the back of my neck and pulled me back against his chest. Hello, I'm Flynn Bennett. I see. And you and my daughter are... Flynn didn't miss a beat. Friends with benefits. I froze, paralyzed by the look on my mother's face. I wanted to scream at Flynn and kick him in the shins for saying that, even though I was struggling not to burst out laughing. I was going to pay for that later. He just ensured that this visit would be fodder for future Sunday dinner conversations about Arden and her wayward choices for quite some time. Mom's lips twisted into what could be described as a cross between a snarl and a grimace. Do you belong to that motorcycle outside? Flynn massaged his thumb over my stiff neck, sending chills down my spine. It belongs to me. I take it you have some form of employment? Dishwasher, busboy? She took in his torn, grease-stained jeans and t-shirt. Chimney sweep? Mother! It's all right. Flynn squeezed my shoulder. Yeah, I work. I'm a mechanic. I own Island Auto at the south end of the island. Okay, I'd known he was a mechanic, but I hadn't realized he owned the place. How many times had I Googled him? I'd read articles on his arrest, subsequent prison sentence, the accident. Never once had any of those articles stated that he owned the shop where he was injured. Why the hell not? Plenty of them mentioned the mistakes in his past. That kind of pissed me off. A mechanic. My mother spit it out like it was a dirty word threatening to soil her pristine lips. Then she turned an icy gaze to me and blew out a light breath, just enough to let me know how ticked off she was. Well, Arden, since you rarely answer your cell phone, I stopped to let you know Haley and I will need your help with the upcoming fundraiser, the Homes with Heart campaign benefiting the island's foster children. Haley's worked on it tirelessly, but now, with her terrible morning sickness, we will have to take over some of the duties and recruit more volunteers. We'll discuss it in more detail tomorrow at Sunday dinner. I just nodded, but Flynn raised a finger. I volunteer. My mother's jaw dropped. That's very appreciated, but entirely unnecessary. Oh, but I insist. You said you're looking for volunteers. I'm a volunteer. My mother was silent for a full 30 seconds. It was obvious she was caught between a rock and a hard place. I couldn't help myself. I found the whole interaction funny as hell. Flynn had one-upped her. She couldn't exactly refuse a volunteer. Of course. Very kind of you. So I'll see you tomorrow at dinner. We'll discuss the details then. Flynn winked at her, and my mother practically choked on her own saliva. She gaped at Flynn but recovered her composure and forced another stiff smile. She cleared her throat and snootily looked over him from top to bottom. We dress for dinner. Flynn's fingers tightened around the back of my neck and he grunted. Well, I am so glad you told me that. I might have showed up naked otherwise. Oh, well, guess I'll head out to the charity shop in the basement of Holy Cross and see if I can find me some duds that don't have too many holes or stains. Not completely clueless, Mom's face reddened. She knew full well that she was being poked fun at. She nodded once and hurried out of my house, leaving the door open behind her. As soon as she was out of earshot, I turned and slapped Flynn's chest. Are you nuts? You just practically told my mother that we're together. So? We're not. He pushed the door shut and grinned. We are. You just haven't accepted it yet. You can't go to that dinner, Flynn. Not a chance. It's no joke. Sunday dinner at the Richardsons is brutal. They're like sharks circling the tank. He chuckled. I appreciate your concern, sweetheart, but I promise you I can handle myself. And I'm not joking either, about anything. We are together. You'll get there. In the meantime, I won't push. Too much. He grinned. Especially now that I've got a dinner date. You're not seriously going? Hell yeah, I was invited. He must have seen the look of horror on my face. He leaned down and planted a kiss on my forehead. Don't worry, Arden. I make a great first impression. Didn't you notice how your mom just loved me? I tried to catch his arm and pull him to a stop, but before I could, he was out the door and strolling down the driveway. When he got to his Harley, he stopped. What time should I pick you up tomorrow? I'd hate to be late, this being our first date and all. Flynn! I crossed my arms under my chest and watched as he winked at me once more before hopping on his bike, firing it up and riding off. I stood there chewing my lip as I pondered all the ways this could prove to be disastrous. Chapter 10. Flynn. I'd taken out a half-page ad in the Sunkiss Key Chronicle announcing the shop's reopening, and business had slowly started to trickle back in. I'd also been interviewing and hiring new staff. I glanced up at the clock and grabbed a shop rag to wipe the grease off my hands. I'd been working on the timing belt of a 20-year-old Toyota Camry, but it was getting about that time to get cleaned up and ready for dinner with the Richardsons. It ought to be a riot. I wanted to meet Arden's family and learn where she came from, for better or worse. I had a feeling they had a lot to do with why she shied away from me. I locked the front of the shop and turned all but the safety lights off before heading to the staircase that led to my apartment. The sound of the side door opening stopped me. To my surprise, Arden walked in, stepping around a set of tires. My body tensed and my cock stiffened as I drank her in. She did that to me just by her presence. Her hair was curled and pinned away from her face. She wore a conservative white dress that fell to her knees and covered her breasts as well as any and all hint of cleavage. She looked so pure, so chaste, so fucking pretty. She managed to look hotter in a puritanical outfit than a stripper looked in a G-string and pasties. As she came closer to me, I saw that she'd put on a touch of mascara and simple pink lipstick that hid the natural color of her lips. I liked the way she looked without it, but I was more than willing to kiss it all off her. I stepped off the bottom stair and dropped the shop rag I'd been holding. Hey, I was just gonna jump in the shower and come pick you up. Hey, I just thought I'd come and give you a quick rundown on my family. She stopped. Why are you looking at me like that? I took another step toward her. Like what? Like you're starving and I'm on the dollar menu at the drive-thru? Stop it. Do you have any idea what you do to me, Arden? I closed the gap between us and stood there, aching with the need to claim her. I've kept my hands to myself for the last 2 days and you come in here looking like that? It's torture. I want to eat you up. Her cheeks colored. I wish you wouldn't say things like that. I ran my knuckle down her cheek and grunted. No? No. She swallowed loud enough for me to hear it and reached a tentative hand up to touch a spot on my jaw. Dirt. You have a spot of dirt on your face? Why do you wish I wouldn't say things like that, Arden? She swayed closer and rested her hand on my chest. Because. Because? She met my gaze and her hand flexed slightly, her nails lightly digging into my skin. She tried to avoid my question. I just wanted to give you another chance to back out of dinner. My family isn't like normal families. They're... Don't try to change the subject. Why do you wish I wouldn't say things like that? Why shouldn't I tell you how much I want to bury my face between your thighs and taste your sweet pussy, lick you until you tremble and come apart? Why shouldn't I tell you that I toss and turn at night because I can't stop wondering what it will feel like when I bury my cock deep inside you and fuck you until you scream my name? I slid my arms around her waist. Tell me, sweet Arden. She gasped when I tightened my grip, locking her body against mine. I knew she could feel my erection pressing into her stomach, but it was only fair because I could smell the mouth-watering aroma of her arousal. She swallowed loudly. Holy shit, that's hot. Her chest heaved against mine, and she tangled her hand in my shirt and yanked my face closer to hers. Maybe we should think about the implications of this if it happens. I trailed my hands down to her ass and cupped it. Growling, I flexed my fingers. Oh, it's happening. Her eyes darkened. With my lips a breath away from hers, I grinned. Here are the implications of this. You deserve a man who wants to cherish you, a man who can't ever get enough of these delicious curves of yours, a man who will do whatever it takes to make you writhe in pleasure. I am that man. She inhaled sharply, then closed the space between our lips. Her hands tangled in my hair and held on as she let out the sexiest, needy moan. She didn't need to hold on. There was no chance I was letting her go. My sweet little mate, with the chaste white dress, burst into flames in my arms, deepening the kiss matching my tongue stroke for stroke. I growled into her mouth as I lifted her up and against me. Her thighs locked around my waist, and I cursed the layers of fabric between us. I needed to feel her bare skin against my bare skin. Our tongues tangled and Arden nipped my lip, yanked my hair, moaned into my mouth. Her small body rocked against mine as she dug her heels into my ass. A match had been struck inside my little mate, and she was hot as fire. I loved the passion she held inside, and I loved even more that she was so willing to unleash it on me. Desperate for more of her, I walked her forward until we bumped into the front of a car, my Mustang. I sat her on the top of the hood and ran my hands up her calves. The silkiness of her dress was nothing compared to the soft thighs beneath. Stroking her smooth legs, I pushed her dress higher until I grazed the edge of her panties. Lace. I had to see her in them before dragging them off. I broke away from our kiss and held her heavy-lidded gaze as I lifted her dress higher so I could feast on the vision of her bare thighs for the first time. White lace panties against her creamy skin. They were small and delicate, with a telltale damp spot that smelled like heaven and made my cock jump. I slid them slowly down her legs, revealing a little at a time the treasure between her thighs. Arden's knees reflexively clamped together as I slid her panties past them. I slipped them over her feet and shoved them in my pocket. A little whimper escaped her throat when I swung her right calf up onto my shoulder, exposing her glistening pussy. The motion made her fall back on the hood, and she propped herself on her elbows. I started at her ankle, kissing, biting, flicking my tongue. I wanted to taste and savor every inch of her. Her pretty pink pussy lips were slick and inviting, screaming for me to devour her. Arden watched me through thick lashes, her mouth parted, her chest heaving. Her eyes were molten, her lips were bruised from our kissing. I held her legs apart and stared for a moment, committing the vision to memory. The breath left my lungs. Every secret inch of her was bared to me, and she was exquisite. Her pulse beat hard at her throat and color stained her cheeks. When she wiggled and her whimpers turned more desperate, I wrapped my arms around her hips and buried my face in her sweet center. Using my tongue and teeth, I teased and played with her. I tasted every delicious inch of her, delved as deep inside of her as I could get with my tongue, and left her trembling. Just as I felt her begin to go over the edge, I focused on her sensitive clit, flicking my tongue gently back and forth over it. Arden's hips lifted and she screamed my name. As her cries echoed around the garage, I found myself hoping everyone passing on the street heard her pleasure. Her orgasm was powerful as it hit, her muscles quivering, her fingers tugging at my hair. She writhed wildly under me. Her chest rose and fell as she stared at me, still between her legs, tonguing her languidly, lapping up her juices. Her eyes were wide. She appeared surprised by her own pleasure. I grinned. She hadn't seen anything yet. Chapter 11. Arden. My body was still shaking from dizzying pleasure when Flynn pulled me off the car, turned me around, and bent me over it. I sucked a needy breath into my straining lungs as my hands slapped the hood. Pressing into me from behind, he molded his body over mine and gripped my chin, turning my face to his so he could kiss me. I tasted myself on his tongue, then gasped as I felt his bare flesh against my ass, long and hard as granite. His whisper was raw against the shell of my ear. "Guide me inside, sweet Arden." I shivered as I gripped his shaft and pumped it. My back arched and my head dropped against his chest. He was big, and despite the fact that I was slick and ready, he stretched me as he slowly entered. Flynn pulled my hand away and slapped it back on the hood of the car. Burying his face against my neck, he withdrew slightly and pumped back inside until I felt his thighs hitting mine. Completely sheathed in me, he wrapped his arms around my waist and hovered there. The air felt like it was alive around us. Energy seemed to lick out and stroke my body as I waited for him to move. I was lost to him. I rolled my hips, his hands locked on them, and his throaty moan was music to my ears. Pulling almost all the way out, he reached around and his fingers circled my clit as he thrust back in, harder than I'd expected. I would have stumbled if he hadn't been holding me steady. My core throbbed as I waited for more. The next strokes were gentle and slow, then another hard thrust. He alternated like that, unpredictable, and keeping me on the edge until I wanted to scream. I was gasping for breath, panting, as he unzipped the back of my dress and slid his hand inside to cup my breast. His thumb flicked over my nipple, and his strokes got harder and harder. My hands tried to dig into the hood of the car, trying to hold on to anything as he fucked me. His hand came up and settled over mine, his fingers slipping between mine. My orgasm exploded out of me from every single nerve ending in my body. He felt bigger as my vaginal walls clamped around him, pulsing with increased blood flow. Mine. Flynn's guttural growl made me shiver. I opened my mouth to cry out, my body drowning in pleasure as Flynn's own release shot out in warm bursts. We remained that way for several minutes, holding on to each other as we came down together. Flynn peppered kisses along my neck, face, and shoulders until he finally pulled out of me. Then sweeping me up in his arms, he carried me up the stairs and into the small apartment above his garage. I wanted to look around, but I was still so dazed with pleasure I could barely keep my head up as he carried me into the bathroom. I had just had The strongest, most intense orgasm of my life. My head was still too high up in the clouds for me to be shy as he undressed me and placed me in the shower under the stream of hot water before climbing in with me. Flynn rolled the bar of soap in his hands to lather it and then began soaping my body tenderly. From my neck to my toes, he gently scrubbed every inch of me, his big hands caressing my body so thoroughly and lovingly, he worked me into another frenzied desire. He knelt, half out of the shower, to taste me again. He worked me right up to the edge of orgasm before the hard maleness of his body wrapped around me from behind, capturing me, and he took me up against the shower wall. We hadn't said anything else to each other, but I felt like we all of a sudden shared a connection, like we were somehow operating on the same mental wavelength. We stared into each other's eyes as we towel-dried each other. His eyes trailed over my naked body, and I did the same to him. There was so much heat and desire in his eyes that I didn't try to hide the roundness of my body. I didn't think about the size of my hips or ass. The way Flynn looked at me made it abundantly clear that he liked what he saw very much. Standing in front of him with dripping hair, no makeup, completely bare, I'd never felt more beautiful, more vibrant, or more sexy. It wasn't until I heard ringing coming from my dress that reality slapped me upside the head. Breaking away from our staring contest, I grabbed for the phone tucked away in the front pocket of my discarded dress. "Oh, God, it's my mom!" I noticed the time and gasped. "Fuck! We're late for dinner!" Flynn hugged me from behind, his still hard shaft tucking against my ass, and grinned wickedly. Such a sweet mouth to utter such dirty words. I love it. I caught sight of us in the mirror and couldn't help the smile that stretched my lips. He was hot as hell and staring back at me with so much warmth and affection in his dark eyes. My phone rang again, and I was jerked back to reality. Should I answer? I shouldn't, right? Answer. Tell her we're on our way. I panicked. I can't go over there. Not after what we just did. No, quick, think of a good excuse. Laughing, he nipped my shoulder and picked my dress up. Answer, and put this back on, Arden. We're going. I grabbed my dress and frowned. You sure? He frowned back at me. I'm going. Swearing, I slid my dress over my head and answered as I smoothed and straightened it. Sorry, Mom. The time got away with me, but we're on our way. You're late. The roast is going to dry out. On our way. I hung up and went to find Flynn, who'd slipped out of the bathroom. His apartment was nicer than I expected, which hit me with an immediate sense of shame. What had I expected? Old takeout containers, empty beer cans, and mismatched furniture from secondhand treasures? Yeah, actually. The place was clean, with hardwood floors, an open floor plan, and sleek contemporary furniture. It was uncluttered, but not so stark that it didn't feel cozy. I found Flynn in the bedroom, and I noticed his closet was surprisingly organized as well. I turned my back to him and stared over my shoulder. Zip me, please? He brushed his lips over my ear and growled, I prefer unzipping you. I shivered and looked around for my panties. My underwear? He slipped his hand under my dress and cupped my ass, squeezing. Mine now. I glowered. No, I'm not going to dinner with my family without underwear on. He scratched the side of his head. I guess you could wear some of mine. He stepped into a pair of briefs and slid them up, tucking his still hard erection into them. Fuck. I hope that goes away before I meet your family. I blushed, which seemed silly considering what had just happened. You're really not going to give me my panties back? Pulling on jeans, he grinned. Nope. Dick? More? Already? Okay, your wish is my command. He pretended to start removing his jeans. Stop! We're late! Come on! He wrapped me in a hug and kissed my neck. One thing this afternoon taught me is that you may look like an innocent little lamb, but you definitely got some naughty in you, sweet Arden." I glanced up at him and felt my pulse race. 2 times should have been enough, but my craving for him wasn't dying down. If anything, it was stronger. Shit. Chapter 12. Flynn. My sweet little kitten with the voracious hellcat underneath looked a little skittish about getting on the back of my Harley. "Just hop on, sweetheart." "I don't have panties on, Flynn. I'll just walk." Since Arden had walked, not driven, to my place, I gave her no choice but to ride on my motorcycle to her parents' house. I tugged her panties from my pocket and dangled them on the end of my finger. "I want those back later." She snatched them from me and looked around to see if anyone was watching. Scowling, she got as close as she could and then stepped into the lacy little panties and slid them up her legs. The display made my dick jump and my tiger's possessive streak roar to life. I scanned the immediate area too. If anyone had seen that, I'd have to kill him. Arden smacked my arm. "Why are you making that growly sound? You're the one who made me do that." I grunted. "I didn't think about anyone else seeing what's mine." She rolled her eyes, gripped my shoulders, and awkwardly threw her leg over the bike, mumbling to herself as she climbed on. "Never hear the end of this. Show up late, a rumpled mess. Back of a motorcycle, island bad boy." I grinned and rubbed her thigh as she scooted forward, wrapping her arms around my waist. "I guess I shouldn't mention the handprint on your ass, should I?" Her screech was drowned out as my Harley fired up. It made her tighten her hold around my middle, and I pulled away from the shop and out onto Main Street. It was a short drive to her parents' house on Palm Street, but it was enough for me to know that I loved the feel of her behind me on the bike. The scent of her was whipped around us by the wind, her soft breasts were pressed against my back, and she had a tight, possessive grip on me. I never wanted to ride my Harley without her on the back ever again. I parked in front of the huge house her folks owned. I got off the bike and lifted her off, setting her down in front of me. My breath lodged in my throat and my dick stiffened like I hadn't just spent an hour fucking her. Her eyes were bright, her hair was wild, disheveled, and still slightly damp. She was flushed and breathing heavily, with lips that were red and slightly swollen from my kisses. A wide, uninhibited smile stretched across her face. I couldn't fight the urge to capture those plump, sweet lips in my mouth. I had to taste them again. Her fingers clutched my shirt and dug into my sides. Her breasts pressed against my chest as she leaned into me. Just when I started to think it would be a good idea to bend her over my bike and bury my face in her from behind, a shrill voice came out from somewhere. Arden stiffened against me and pulled away quickly. She ran her hands down her dress nervously, trying to straighten it out. Her cheeks flushed a bright red, and she turned to the house, forcing a smile. "Coming!" I fought a scowl and followed her up the stairs to the front door. Her ass did have my greasy handprint on it, but I wasn't going to remind her of that fact at that moment. It calmed my tiger that she was wearing a mark of my possession, and it made it easy for me to keep a smile on my face. At the top of the stairs, a younger version of Arden's stern-looking mother stood scowling at Arden and blocking our way into the house. "You're a half hour late. What are you thinking? Mom and Dad are so upset." "Let us in, then." My mate's sweet smile vanished. Her shoulders stiffened and her expression morphed into one I wasn't familiar with. It contorted her face into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't like it. She looked tense, like she'd snap in half at any moment. When Minnie Marguerite's eyes moved to me, they widened and began blinking rapidly. "Oh, wow. Mom said you were bringing someone, but she clearly did not go into enough detail." I rested my hand on the small of Arden's back and reached my other arm around her to push the door open farther so I could usher her past Judge Judy, who I assumed was Arden's sister. "Flynn Bennett, nice to meet you too." She scowled. "Don't blame me for judging. You are dating my sister after all, or whatever it is you two are doing. Mom didn't really say, but I assume he's your boyfriend, Arden." Arden mumbled. "He's not my boyfriend." I leaned down so my mouth was an inch from Arden's ear, growling possessively. Don't deny it, sweetheart. You are mine. Then I squeezed her ass cheek and nipped at her earlobe. Thrown off, her sister gasped before racing ahead of us. We followed into a massive dining room with a huge table that looked like it had been set for royalty. There were only 2 empty place settings, and they weren't next to each other. I thought about doing something to remedy that, but instead I chose to just go with it and observe the scene, see what had Arden looking like a bowstring about to snap. Arden slipped into a seat between her mother and a little girl. I took up the chair on the other side of the table a few seats away, next to a pretentious-looking asshole who scooted away from me when I sat. The room was so quiet that a fart would have sounded like an A-bomb. I met Arden's nervous eyes from down the table and flashed her a huge grin of reassurance. I hated the vibes coming off her. Where was my sweet, sometimes flustered, always capable, always kind Arden? She shrunk into herself, almost like her self-confidence had withered. I turned to the man at the head of the table, Arden's father. "So, let me introduce myself. I'm Flynn Bennett." I winked at Arden. "Arden's boyfriend. Sorry we're late." For a second, I had considered introducing myself as her fiancé, but I didn't want to add to Arden's tension. With a red sheen tinting his overly tan and weathered face, her father introduced himself and the rest of the table. Marguerite cleared her throat. "What did you two get caught up with? You're over half an hour late. The roast is probably going to be dry as a bone." Arden opened her mouth, probably to try to soothe her mother, but I just smiled and rested my elbows on the table. "We were in the shop. I was fooling around under her hood, lubing up her chassis, and firing up her engine." Arden's eyes widened. Trying to keep a straight face, she pulled her water glass to her lips to hide the smile she was fighting. Her eyes stayed on the table as she nodded. "You probably should have changed before coming, Arden. You're all dirty." Haley, the older, mouthier sister, frowned. "And you missed church this morning, again." Chloe hopped in. "It was a lovely sermon." Arden's smile was brittle. James waved off their harping and picked up the platter of meat. "If your sister would rather sleep than hear the good word, that's her choice." "You know we just worry about her, Dad," Haley sighed. I caught Stuart looking down the table at Arden, and my hands balled into fists. There was something I recognized in his gaze, and I didn't like it. That wasn't the way a brother-in-law should be looking at his wife's sister. He felt my open glare on him and quickly looked away. I continued to stare menacingly. I wanted to make sure he got my message loud and clear. If that fucker dared look at my mate like that again, this fancy silverware was going to become a fancy weapon. I'd pluck his eyes out with the goddamn shrimp fork. "So, Flynn, what is it you do?" I took a big bite of roast and chewed before answering James. It was dry. "Fix cars." Arden's head swung up. She looked a little miffed. "He doesn't just fix cars. He owns Island Automotive." Well, wasn't that interesting? My sweet mate's backbone showed up when she was attempting to defend me. I was flattered and humbled, but it wasn't necessary. "I got this, sweetheart." "The auto shop on south end of Main Street?" James's brow furrowed and he seemed to be lost in thought for a moment. "You wouldn't happen to be the guy who recently sold the beverage business, would you?" "James, must we talk business at the table? Please, dear, you know the house rule." Marguerite sighed and pushed a small piece of roast around her plate before taking a long sip of wine. It appeared Marguerite preferred her calories in liquid form. "I'm just getting to know the man our daughter brought home to dinner is all. As a financial advisor, I've heard some things through the grapevine." James met my eyes again and raised his brows, waiting for an answer. Marguerite refilled her wine glass and took another drink. Her sips were becoming slurps. "Besides, your financial talk is probably over his head. You should stick to topics the man can relate to, like engine grease and lug nuts." Arden inhaled a sharp breath. "Mother!" I noticed James' face growing redder and redder the longer I avoided answering his question, so I had a little fun with it and just kept chewing, letting him stew a while. "Well?" James tossed his fork down impatiently. "Well, what?" Did you turn a tidy profit with the sale of a beverage business or not? The vein at the side of the man's neck bulged and he leaned over his plate. I popped another bite of roast into my mouth and chewed it before deciding it probably wouldn't fare well for me if the first time I attended family dinner with Arden, her dad had a stroke. I shrugged. I guess it depends on what you call big. Arden was staring at me with a confused expression. The whole family was a trip. Marguerite seemed to be vibrating with suppressed fury that she was trying to quell with wine. Arden was on eggshells. Chloe and Haley both wore frowny scowls. Everyone was uptight and unhappy, except me. I'd never been to anyone's family dinner before, and I was enjoying the hell out of it. Come on, boy. No one likes a tease. How much did you walk away with? James was leaning across his plate so far his tie was in his mashed potatoes, and Vincent was showing quite a bit of interest in our interaction. I wondered why. The island gossip should be ashamed of themselves, neglecting to mention dollar amounts. What is the world coming to? I grinned casually. I agree with Marguerite. Here we are in the company of these lovely ladies enjoying a delicious dinner. It's a shame to spoil it with shop talk. James sat back in his seat, a dark glower on his face. Arden sank lower in her seat and shoved another spoonful of mashed potatoes in her mouth. I hated to see my mate, whose smiles could light up a room, all pouty and sullen like that. Haley snapped her head in Arden's direction. Honestly, Arden, we just had the conversation about carbs last Sunday, and look at the mound of potatoes you have there. Arden's face turned beet red, and her fork froze midway to her mouth before she lowered it back to her plate. Her sisters snickered between themselves. Something wasn't right. What's the matter, we rationing potatoes? Marguerite waved her wine glass in the air empathetically, oblivious to the Merlot splashing over the rim onto the white tablecloth. Haley's right, Arden. A moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. I watched Arden slump lower into her chair. Oh, hell no. That was not gonna happen. These folks could lay it on me all they wanted. I've had far worse than anything they could dish out. But they needed to stick to me. No fucking way I was going to sit here while they insulted my mate. And from what I'd seen of the Richardson family so far, not one of them could hold a candle to Arden. There's not a thing wrong with Arden's hips. They're sexy as hell. I nodded at her plate. Eat up, sweetheart. Haley's eyes narrowed into a glare. No one here is trying to embarrass Arden, but since you won't let it drop, she's carrying a spare tire around her middle. I leaned toward Haley, with my hand cupped around my mouth as though I had a secret for her, but I spoke loud enough for the whole table to hear. I get the jealousy. I agree it's unfortunate for you. What's that supposed to mean? Haley's voice went up an octave. Well, darlin', it's not her fault she won the genetic lottery. My eyes flicked up and down over Haley's figure as if to make my point. And you lost. Stuart chose that moment to snort, which is really what set Haley off. She stood up, threw her napkin down, and stormed out of the room. Stuart groaned and got up to go after his wife. Marguerite rose in a huff and stormed out of the room as well, weaving slightly. Chloe clicked her tongue. Leave it to Arden to make a spectacular mess of things. With an angry glare, she tossed her napkin on top of Arden's plate and followed the others. James and Vincent looked at each other and then scooted back from the table. Vincent collected his kids before leaving the room. Arden looked down the table at me with her bottom lip pinched between her teeth. She didn't look too angry, but I fought my smile just in case. I cleared my throat. Well, that could have gone worse, honestly. The corners of Arden's lips turned up slightly. Yeah, the table could have burst into flames. I shrugged and she giggled. We should go. I tossed my napkin down on the table. Oh, thank God. I was worried you'd want to stay for dessert. Chapter 13. Flynn. After wake-up sex, then shower sex, then kitchen sex, Arden raced out of the door already late for work. She called over her shoulder for me to lock the house. She hadn't even had time for breakfast, which I felt a little guilty about. I just hoped all the orgasms I gave her would make up for an empty stomach. I was a minute behind her, picking up the wet towels and straightening the bedding before heading out, when her cat walked in meowing at me. I scratched the little guy behind his ears the way he liked, and he followed me to the kitchen where I poured him a bowl of dry cat food. "Not so appetizing, is it, buddy?" I searched through the fridge and found a couple slices of bologna and Arden's lunchbox. She forgot that, too. I tossed the bologna in the cat's bowl. "There you go. Thanks for watching out for our girl, but I got her now." The cat purred and chowed down on the lunch meat. There was no doubt that Arden was the best thing to ever come into my life, but there were still a couple of things between us. I knew she was upset about her family. She didn't say so, but I could tell. Then there was the big thing, my tiger. I stopped into the shop for a minute and found everything running smoothly in the capable hands of my newly rehired mechanic, Dave. He'd worked for me for 4 years, but was forced to find other work after my accident. As soon as he heard I was back and the shop had reopened, he returned. After letting Dave know I'd be back later, I headed to Sun-Kissed Medical Center. As I drove, I played the events of dinner with the Richardsons over in my mind. That family was something else. I couldn't understand why they ragged on Arden so much. She was a hard worker with a good job. She was responsible, kind-hearted, warm, and wonderful. Any parent should be proud. What the hell did they want from her? And why the hell did she keep going back? I couldn't understand that either. Yes, I could. Family. My parents were killed when I was too young to remember them, and I grew up in the foster care system until my first shift at 16. After that, human foster parents didn't cut it for an angry and confused shifter orphan who was trying to understand the world and himself and get a handle on the animal inside. It took a long time for me to gain control of my tiger. I pretty much lived on the streets in abandoned buildings or friends' couches. I worked odd jobs, which left no time for school. I learned pretty quickly that life as a street kid sucked. That was when I started manufacturing hooch and when I found out I had a head for business. As a kid who grew up in the system, I wouldn't have refused blood relatives no matter how dysfunctional. And there was love there in Arden's family, I could see it. It was buried beneath judgment and ridicule, but it was there. I supposed dysfunctional families traversed all social strata. When I arrived at Sun-Kissed Medical Center, I followed Arden's scent to the maternity ward. She was on the other side of a thick viewing window, sitting in a rocking chair with a tiny infant in her arms. As she rocked, she smiled down at the baby and hummed a soft melody. Her eyes were warm and full of love, and I was overwhelmed with the longing for us to have kids of our own. Couldn't wait. I sure as hell hoped she wanted babies. I loved kids, and if I had it my way, Arden and I would have a house full. "Can I help you?" I didn't look away from Arden. "Just waiting on my, girlfriend to come out." "Arden is your girlfriend?" My eyes remained on Arden. "Well, I'm not talking about the baby." "Well, shut the door. Arden didn't tell me she was seeing anyone. I'm just surprised." She stuck her hand out and I shook it. "Ruby Jenkins, I'm a good friend of Arden's." I glanced at her briefly and smiled, then turned back to my mate. "She's beautiful." Arden glanced up and spotted me. Her eyes widened and her lower lip was instantly trapped between her teeth as she smiled. "Oh, yeah." Ruby stood slightly behind me, watching Arden and nodding. "She has it bad for you. I have never seen her look at anyone like that before. How long have you two been an item?" Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Can't have been that long." I didn't answer. I watched as Arden tucked the baby back into its incubator and emerged from the room. Her smile was magnetic. "You're here." "Yeah, your boyfriend is here, Arden." Ruby elbowed her, but Arden ignored her. "Want to explain that one?" I pulled Arden into a hug and kissed her forehead. "You didn't have time for breakfast this morning and you forgot your lunch, so I brought it." I held up the lunch box. Ruby's brows shot so high they practically disappeared into her hairline. "Oh my God, did he say morning? Your boyfriend spent the night with you last night? You had your cobwebs swept and didn't tell me about it. What the hell, Arden?" Arden's cheeks reddened. "Ruby, this is Flynn Bennett." The other woman gasped. "Flynn Bennett? Coma guy? I mean, Oh God, sorry, that was so rude, I laughed. Don't worry about it. Oh, wow, this is something we're really gonna need to talk about, Arden groaned. Maybe later. I leaned down and kissed my sweet mate's perfect lips. I have to go to work. I'll see you when you get off. She sighed and leaned into me. Okay. Nice to meet you, Ruby. I kissed Arden once more on the forehead and again on the lips before pulling away and leaving her to field the 100 or so questions her coworker was throwing at her. I went back to the shop and attempted to spend the day trying to get caught up on paperwork, but my thoughts were at war with themselves. I still had one thing to discuss with Arden, one big thing, one big striped, furry, fanged thing, and my tiger was angry and impatient that I hadn't revealed him to our mate yet. With the exception of Arden's family, an issue I plan to remedy soon, everything between Arden and me was great. I supposed I was nervous about how she might react to finding out about my shifter side. Fuck. It wasn't like me to give a goddamn about what anyone thought of me. But Arden turned everything upside down. It had to be done, though. About the time I realized I was pacing back and forth in my tiny office was when I called it quits for the day. I shot Arden a text telling her I was bringing dinner to her place after work, ran out to man grocery and pedal pushers, and back to my place to prepare food. I pulled my Mustang into Arden's driveway seconds after she did, grabbed dinner and the flowers, and got out to greet her with a kiss. I'm a tiger. I cringed. Damn, I was way off my game. She laughed lightly and unlocked the door. You sure are, big guy. Double cringe. Fuck, I'm already screwing this up. I followed her in and handed her the roses. These are for you. Smiling, she bit her lip. I meant what I said. I sat the food down on the stove and then wrapped my arms around her and pulled her closer. I actually am a tiger. I don't think I follow. I was fucking everything up, I knew it, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. I'd never had an issue talking to a woman before, probably because I'd never cared before. Now, the one time it mattered to me, I acted like a complete loser, tripping all over my tongue. I'm what's called a tiger shifter, which means I shift into a tiger. I know it's strange to hear that, believe me, it's strange to tell it. I laughed nervously. Do you have any questions? I'm waiting for the punchline. It's not a joke. Sighing, she subtly moved away. It's been a long day, Flynn. I don't know what this game is, but I'm tired. Neither of us got a lot of sleep last night. I was at a loss for words. I'd learned to wheel and deal in the business world when I was still a teenager, and I'd honed those smooth-talking skills in the years since. Rarely was I at a loss for what to say, but I was at a loss. Determined, I took a couple of steps back. I'm just going to fucking show you. When I started taking off my clothes, she grinned. Oh, it's some kind of sex game? I shook my head, sucked in a deep breath, and shifted. My tiger was huge. Shifter species were often much larger than their non-shifter counterparts. As my tiger relished being in the same room as our mate, he moved toward her, thrilling at her beautiful curves, her scent, and particularly her hazel eyes as they stared, tracked him, and rolled to the back of her head. She went down hard. Fuck. Chapter 14. Arden. I woke up on the couch to Flynn stroking my hair and staring down at me with a look of concern. My eyes flew open wide the second the memory returned of what I'd just witnessed. Before I'd passed out, I rubbed at the sore spot on my head. I wasn't normally a fainter, but I didn't normally see a man transform into a tiger before my eyes either. I struggled to get up. Hey, careful, sweetheart. I saw you go down, but I wasn't quick enough to shift back and catch you. You got a nasty bump there. Flynn helped me to sit up on the couch as I replayed the memory. He'd been standing there 1 minute, naked as the day he was born, and the next, he was all teeth, claws, fur, and deadliness. The biggest tiger I'd ever seen. My head hurt and I was hungry, but I just watched a man turn into a jungle animal. Shifting. Those were the words he'd used. Flynn had put his pants back on. He was still gently stroking my hair. I leaned my head into his caress. "I'm sorry I scared you." I frowned. "You didn't scare me." "Sweetheart, you passed out." He stared at a spot on the floor a few feet away. "Are you okay with this? With me? I mean, it's who I am. I can't change it." I frowned. "Are you kidding? I'm totally okay. It's great." My voice didn't even sound convincing to my own ears. "Okay, fine. You didn't pass out because you saw me shift into a tiger and you're not still freaked out." Flynn was on the defensive. I could hear it in his voice, and I wasn't sure how to remedy it. I wasn't sure I even cared at that moment. So much about him clashed with who I was and the life I was raised in. "I'm not still freaked out. It's all good. You're still Flynn. I can see that." He ran a hand through his long hair and slipped a tie around it to bind it. "Look, that did not go as smoothly as I would have liked. I panicked. I've never had to tell anyone about being a shifter before, so I figured. Well, the flowers and cooking dinner were a nice touch." He put his hands on his hips and his brow furrowed. "You sure you're not in shock? I don't think you're acting like you should." "And how should I be acting?" "Scared, surprised, freaked out, I don't know. I just shifted into a tiger in front of you. You didn't know that shifters exist, right?" I shook my head. "No clue." Then I shrugged. "You're still you. It's cool." He cupped the back of my neck and rested his forehead against mine. "I was scared to tell you. I thought you were going to freak out and tell me to fuck off and never come back." I swallowed and pulled away from him. "I'm not freaking out, but I need time to think." He groaned. "I spoke too soon." I stared at the wall on the other side of the room. This thing between us, it's a lot. I don't know what's happening, not just now, but ever since I first saw you. I sighed. We come from different worlds. I mean, Martin. He stopped in the middle of putting his shirt on and glared at me. "Martin? The boring accountant who wears a red lacy thong and garter belt and peeks into neighbors' windows?" "How'd you know?" "I remembered. There are a lot of things you talked about while I was lying in that hospital bed that have come back to me." He crossed his arms over his chest and glared. "You think Martin Fink is the man for you?" He rolled his head back and barked a humorless laugh. "Ha! That's rich." I don't know. I don't know what to think at the moment. This is such a shock. It's just a shock. "Are you talking right now about the fact that I'm a shifter, or do you mean everything about us? Me, in general?" "No. Yes. I don't know. Maybe I just need time to figure this out." I groaned and rubbed my head. "Think things through." "Think things through. Fine. When you finish thinking things through, you come and find me." He finished slipping his shoes on and came over to me. He looked like he was about to hug me, but he stopped himself. "Fuck, Arden." The pained expression on his face gutted me. What was I doing? What was I saying? I was a split second from telling him not to leave, to stay, that I didn't have a clue what I was saying, that it was my fear talking. But before I could, he was across the room, and I was left sitting there on the couch, speechless, as he walked out slamming the door behind him. I heard his Mustang start up and the roar of the engine fade as he drove away. Flynn the tiger. I moved into the kitchen and looked into the pot on the stove. Tears filled my eyes. Mashed potatoes. A whole pot of creamy, buttery, fluffy mashed potatoes. What had I just done? I groaned and took the pot to the table, tears streaming down my face. Grabbing a spoon on the way, I sat down in front of the potatoes and started eating. The tears didn't stop. I wanted to call him back and tell him I hadn't meant to hurt him or send him away. I wanted to call him and tell him It didn't matter he was a tiger or that he had a criminal past, but I didn't. Frustrated, I ate more potatoes and slumped in my chair until I was stuffed and could barely move. Then I stumbled to my bed and collapsed. The sheets still had his scent. Staring up at the ceiling, I tried to make sense of things. Maybe the problem was that, from years of living with a family that was more likely to tear you down than build you up, I couldn't make sense of a man like Flynn wanting to be with me. Martin, maybe. My question wasn't only how Flynn fit into my life. Flynn was danger and excitement and passion and flames. How did I fit into his? Chapter 15. Arden. I dragged my tired self out of sun-kissed medical center the next night, exhausted from working a double and cranky from plaguing thoughts of Flynn. One of the other nurses had come down with a stomach bug and we were short-staffed. On top of that, I'd barely slept the night before, despite eating enough mashed potatoes to send myself into a food coma. I tossed and turned, thinking of Flynn the entire night. As tired as I was, a burst of adrenaline shot through me when my cell rang. My heart leaped, hoping it was Flynn, and that we would both say magic words to each other that would make everything all right. Then I could go home and sleep all night wrapped in his strong arms. One glance at the screen told me just how far down the fairy tale rabbit hole I'd fallen. Martin. I'd avoided the man for days, but for whatever reason, maybe fatigue, maybe surrender, this time I answered. "Hello, Martin."
"Arden, hello. I didn't think you were going to answer. I've left a couple of voicemails this week. You never returned my calls."
I balanced my cell between my shoulder and chin, unlocked my car door, and tossed my purse and my lunchbox in the passenger seat. "I know, Martin. I'm sorry about that. I should have returned your call, and I should have done it sooner." I paused. Now for the hard part.
"So, listen, I was wondering if you'd like to do dinner or catch a movie this week. Your mother said—"
"Martin? My mother?" I sighed as I slid behind the wheel. "Well, to be honest, I only agreed to consider another date because of my mother. The woman can put extreme pressure on, but there's something else. I have someone else in my life." Did I, though? Did I still have Flynn? Flynn and I needed to talk, but he had told me to come and find him after I'd thought things through. I really hoped he meant that.
"I see. Well, I do understand the pressures family can put on a person. I happen to have a well-meaning but somewhat overbearing family myself."
I snorted a laugh. "Yeah, overbearing, that's a good word. My mother puts waterboarding to shame." Martin laughed.
"Can I offer some advice?"
"Sure."
"I found that it doesn't pay to live a life to please someone else. You end up miserable, and they're never satisfied. You do you."
Miserable. Yeah. That was pretty much how I'd felt since Flynn had walked out my door the night before. "Martin, that's really good advice. Thank you. And thank you for understanding."
"Good luck, Arden."
Maybe Martin wasn't so creepy after all. I'd been worried about all the messed up things my mother and family thought. My mother harped about a man providing for me, about safety and security, and kept pushing me toward men like Martin. Yet Flynn had braved my family's insults and hadn't run screaming for the hills. With Flynn, I felt not only sparks, but flames and naughtiness. Flynn not only treated me like I was special to him, he treated me like I was everything. He had even respected when I told him I needed time to think and given it to me. On the short drive home, I was distracted by my own thoughts about Flynn. When I made it to the top of my stoop, I noticed my front door open a crack. Was someone trying to rob me? If so, they were in for a rude awakening. "Freeze, motherfuckers!" I flew into the house, holding my lunchbox over my head to wield as a weapon. Stopping short, I found my mother and 2 sisters sitting on my couch, staring at me with horrified expressions. I dropped the lunchbox and bent over with my hands on my knees, inhaling deeply. "You guys gave me a heart attack. I thought I had a break-in." Mom clutched her pearls and scowled. "What in the world were you going to do if we had been an intruder? Someone trying to rob you or kill you? Peg us with a lunchbox?" Haley rolled her eyes and rubbed her abdomen, despite not having a visible baby bump yet. "Do you want to get yourself killed?" Frowning at the lot of them, I picked up my lunchbox. "Why are you here in my house? What are you doing here?" Mom stood up and took a step toward me. "We need to talk." Haley also stood. "About what you're doing with your life." Mom crossed her arms over her chest sternly. "About that garage mechanic you're cavorting with instead of a fine man like Martin Fink." Chloe took a step forward so the 3 of them were lined up like a firing squad. "Did you know that Flynn Bennett has a criminal record?" She wore a smug smirk, as though she got satisfaction from throwing out news that had the potential to shock and cause me pain. My back stiffened, and I glanced into the kitchen where Flynn's mashed potato pot had been moved to the counter. They were nosing around my house. What was next? A scolding about carbs again? "So this is what, an intervention?" "You clearly need one." Chloe tapped the toe of her Jimmy Choo pump on the carpet. "Where were you, by the way? We've been waiting." "Tell me you weren't with that man, Arden." "I was actually working a double shift." I grabbed the pot and put it in the sink. "I don't need this. I'm exhausted and I just want to crawl into bed." "Ugh, that job again. Did you realize that you had a handprint on your ass at dinner on Sunday? In Greece?" Chloe snorted. "I mean, really? A mechanic?" It was just like Flynn to slap a greasy handprint on my butt before we went to dinner with my family. I hid a grin. He also bent me over a '67 Mustang and gave me the ride of my life. Everything about being with Flynn felt good, as long as I didn't let my family's judgment get in the way. "You've made some questionable decisions, Arden, but he has to be the worst. Honestly, I don't know what you were thinking. Did you know he was a convicted felon?" Mom shook her head and sighed. "A felon!" As I listened to how haughty and pretentious my mother and sisters sounded, I remembered in horror the reasons I'd sent Flynn away the night before. I'd practically implied the same thing they were saying, that somehow Flynn and I weren't right for each other because we came from different backgrounds. How's it feel looking at yourself in the mirror, Arden? Not good. Not good at all. He was cruel at dinner, just awful. He insulted me. Haley scowled. He's not like us. I was seething with anger and shame at that point. I was also done keeping my mouth shut just to keep peace with my family. After you insulted me, just so we're clear, you all insulted me first and he didn't like it. So, Haley, he gave you back a taste of your own medicine. Well, Jesus, Arden, what do you expect? You're not exactly taking care of yourself. Did you eat this whole pot of mashed potatoes? Haley crossed her arms and glared. Mom was shaking her head. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to get it together. Your father and I raised you better than this. Wow. I shook my head. Do you hear yourself? Haley rubbed her non-existent baby belly. Is this about the baby? You always get a little weird when one of us gets pregnant. I know you wish it were you, and maybe it could be if you started taking better care of your appearance and stopped dating losers. For goodness sake, Arden, you're not getting any younger, you know. You should probably get yourself together before your eggs all dry up. Shut the fuck up. I screamed the words before I even knew I was going to, but I wasn't sorry. It felt great, so great that I did it again. Shut the fuck up, all three of you. You should hear yourselves with all your judgment and disapproval. I may not be married to some rich guy from a fancy family with perfect children and a perfectly behaved dog and prize-winning flowers, but I have a good life. I work a very good job, and I bought my own house with my own money. I'm happy about those things. Mostly, the times when I'm not happy, when I have to come to Sunday dinner and sit there while you all judge and insult me. You don't like it, Haley? Stop doing it to me. Flynn has a past, so fucking what? A person's past does not necessarily define their future. Yeah, he comes from the streets. He's had to fight and claw his way from poverty with nothing, not even family. He's been supporting himself since he was a teenager. He earned enough money to buy his own automotive shop and start his own liquor distributorship. Do you know how much grit and determination and strength of character it takes to do that? For your information, I am proud of Flynn. And I was. God, why hadn't I told him all that last night? I just told him to leave as though I didn't care. I let one of the finest men I'd ever known walk out of my life. Stupid. You are all dead wrong to judge him for events in his past. Flynn is a better person than any of you. Us. He was better than us. I was breathing heavily by the time I finished my rant. Shouting at my mother and sisters felt exhilarating. I should have done it sooner. But the person I really needed to say some of this to was Flynn. I needed to apologize for doubting him and for doubting us. Let yourselves out when you're done rifling through my things and judging me. I'm going to find Flynn. I threw open the front door and glanced back at them. And don't think I'm showing up at Sunday dinner without Flynn. In fact, I'm not coming to Sunday dinner. Not at all. Not until the three of you learn how to act like decent human beings. Slamming the door behind me, I left with the vision of their shocked faces imprinted on my brain. The adrenaline from what I'd just done was pumping through my body so hard I was shaking. Shit. I'd left my purse inside, but there was no way I was going back for my keys. I wasn't about to ruin that awesome exit. Plus, I was too eager to get to Flynn to have to spend another 20 minutes arguing with my mother and sisters. I started off at a brisk walk, but that turned into a run. I needed Flynn. I needed to talk to him, explain to him, throw my arms around him, bury my face in his chest, and feel one of his warm, enveloping hugs, the ones that made me feel so comforted and cared for. I was so stupid for ever doubting us. When I reached Island Auto, I threw open the shop door. My jaw hit the floor. It was that crazy woman who'd claimed to be pregnant with Flynn's baby. What was her name? Tiff. It was Tiff. She was on top of the '67 Mustang, naked, and spread eagle. The same Mustang Flynn had bent me over the first time he and I... Oh God. She looked over at me and scowled. I stood frozen like an idiot, my stomach plummeting into my shoes. She smirked and nodded toward the top of the stairs. Flynn will be back any minute. You should probably go before this gets awkward. I willed my feet to move, but they refused. I gasped for breath and clutched at my chest. The pain was excruciating. Move, damn it! Stumbling, I finally made my way outside, slamming the door shut behind me and blindly racing away from a scene that was sure to play itself over and over again in my mind for as long as I lived. The neon sign for Mimi's Cabana caught my attention. I'd been stumbling around for I didn't know how long. My tears had dried up, and at that point I just felt numb. When I saw the sign, I knew I needed a stiff one. A drink. I needed a stiff drink, not a stiff... Ugh. I shoved the door with my shoulder and basically fell into the bar. Without looking around, I shuffled over and planted myself on a bar stool next to two big guys. The bartender came over. "Sweetheart,
You look like you could use a drink. You okay?"
She was a large woman, clad in a coconut shell bra and a grass skirt. "I need a shot of tequila, a double." "Oh crap, I left my purse at home." "Wait, I don't have any money. I forgot my purse."
"I got it, Mimi,"
the guy next to me said. I took the shot and downed it in one swallow before looking up to see who had just bought my drink. I didn't recognize him. Just as I was about to thank him, my throat registered the foreign invader. I choked on the burning liquid, coughing so hard that the other of the two guys got up and started patting me on the back. After several seconds, the coughing subsided and my breathing normalized. Sorry, I'm okay. No, not okay, but my throat is fine now."
"Hey, you're the nurse from the maternity ward at Sunkiss Medical Center. Arden, right?"
Holy crap. It was Parker Pettit's husband. I forgot his name, but I'd recognize that huge guy anywhere. He'd practically flattened me.
"I'm Maxim, in case you forgot. You look like you've got some stuff on your mind. Gray and I just want to know one thing. Do we need to break someone's face tonight?"
I looked down into my empty shot glass and shook my head sadly. "Arden!" Suddenly, Layla appeared next to me on one side and Parker on the other. I turned and waved feebly, managing what might vaguely resemble a smile. Parker and Layla exchanged glances, then Layla pulled me off the stool and into a hug. She all but carried me over to a booth in the back corner. Parker motioned me into the bench seat ahead of her. "Let's go, sister. Sit down. We're going to indulge in some girl talk." I slid in. "I don't want to interrupt your evening. Believe me, I'm not the best company right now." They exchanged glances again, and Layla patted my hand. "You're not interrupting anything. You talk, we'll listen." I was about to protest, but the tequila must have loosened my tongue. I sucked in a long breath and started talking. Once I started, I couldn't stop, and it all came out, all of it. From the Sleeping Beauty kiss to the dinner with my family to finding Little Miss Pregnant penthouse centerfold in Flynn's shop. I just went on and on. I couldn't stop. By the time I was done, I'd called Flynn every name in the book, but I finished by explaining that it was probably my fault. When I went silent, Parker only had one thing to say. "I got this." Chapter 16. Flynn.
I was already in a shit mood when Parker Pettit came storming into my shop. I wasn't exactly sure what I might have done to piss off the pint-sized purple bunny, but she sure didn't look pleased. What I wasn't expecting were the words that she hurled at me.
"You stupid dingbat son of a biscuit! How the hell could you tell Arden that she's your mate and then cheat on her?"
She grabbed a wrench from the toolbox next to her and waved it at me. "What the fuck are you talking about, Parker? And put that down before you hurt yourself."
"I'm gonna hurt you. She saw that skanky hoe here last night, walked in on her waiting for you. How do you feel about that?"
I swore and pulled my hands down my face. "Aw, fuck, she saw that?"
"Yeah, she saw that. She was coming over to tell you she wanted to make things work, but instead, she got her heart broken."
Parker swung the wrench in my direction.
"She's still passed out at my house from drowning in tequila last night."
"Fuck!" I slammed my fist into the wall behind me, shattering the brick. What she saw was not what it looked like. I came down and found that psycho stalker spread out all over one of the cars. She wasn't invited, she wasn't welcome, and she sure as hell wasn't allowed to stay. Parker let the wrench hang loosely at her side.
"So, you weren't cheating on her?"
"Of course not, Parker. You know better. Have you ever known a shifter to cheat on their mate?"
"Well,
no." She frowned.
"But you're—"
"Not that big of a fucking asshole. I would never do anything to hurt Arden. She's my mate. I have to make this right."
"Oh, well."
She dropped the wrench back into the toolbox and wiped her hand on her jeans.
"In that case, I suggest you first make sure that whoever she is stops popping up and shoving her prego belly in Arden's face."
"She won't be back. I filed a restraining order. I also called the most likely father of her baby and told him he better get his ass back here and take care of this. So I suspect he'll be returning to town to keep an eye on her soon. I swore more loudly. Fucking bullshit. I would never cheat on Arden.
You love her?
Glaring at the rabbit, I growled and slammed the hood of the car I'd been working on. She's my mate.
Not what I asked.
Yes. Fuck. Yes. She thinks I've only known her for 5 minutes, but I've been listening to her talk to me for 6 months while I was holed up in that hospital bed. I heard every word. Sure, I didn't remember it all right away, but it's come back to me in bits and pieces. I know all about the situation with her family, the way her mother always pushes these boring guys on her. Can you imagine Arden, a woman full of so much passion, so much fire, a woman with such a warm, open, tender heart, married to some stuffy bean counter who gives stiff plastic kisses and considers passion to be scheduling vanilla sex on the calendar once a week? Parker just shook her head, grinning. They wouldn't know how to satisfy a woman like Arden. Hell, I may not even know, but I swear to the heavens above I will die trying. Parker was still staring, still grinning, and now nodding.
Yep, you love her.
She's amazing, Parker. I've never known a woman like her. She's so damn good. So kind and caring. Yeah, I fucking love her. I love everything about her.
Then don't just stand here flapping your gums at me. Go and tell her that. She thinks she lost you for good, that you gave up on her.
I angrily scrubbed a towel over my knuckles. Not a fucking chance. I was trying to back off and give her the opportunity to come to terms with everything. After I met her family, I realized she didn't need anyone else trying to manipulate her or push their will onto her. She deserves to make her own decisions and have them respected. But I can't have her thinking I don't care about her.
Yeah, I don't think giving her space is the best thing right now. Did she really wake you up from a coma with a kiss?
I tossed the towel down and grinned. She did.
Wow, that's romantic. Well, Sleeping Beauty, go get your Princess Charming.
Damn right I will. Point me in the direction of your house.
You're a shifter. Use your sniffer.
I rolled my eyes and she shrugged.
All right. Maxim's at home with the baby, though. If he managed to get her down for a nap, beware. You wake her up, he'll rip your throat out.
I climbed on my bike and headed in the direction Parker gave. It was a fast drive to Shipwreck Way. I parked the bike in front of the house and was halfway up the driveway when the front door cracked open and Arden slipped out, holding her shoes in one hand. She startled and jumped when she saw me. The pain that flashed through her eyes hit me hard. Arden, we have to talk. Her shoulders stiffened and she winced as she jutted her chin up and out. She tugged her shirt into place and walked in the opposite direction. Undeterred, I walked after her. You didn't see what you thought you saw. She spun on her heel and threw one of her shoes at me, then groaned loudly and clutched her head.
Are you really going to try to tell me I didn't see a naked woman spread out over the hood of the same car you and I can't even say it. I know what I saw, Flynn. It wasn't an optical illusion.
I picked up her shoe and ducked when the next one almost nailed me. Picking up the second shoe, I raised my eyebrows at her. Got anything else to throw at me? She growled and bent over. Grabbing a handful of sand, she threw it at me. But the wind was against her. Instantly, she cried out and covered her eyes.
Oh, crap! Why'd I do that? I guess that's karma for ya.
I closed the gap between us and grunted when she flinched away from me. Stop it. Let me help. You're going to hurt yourself.
You already did that.
Tears leaked from her eyes and she was making little whimpering sounds. Arden, baby, look at me. Her eyes snapped shut.
No!
Look at me, right now. She shook her head. Her quavering voice cut me, and I pinned her arms to her sides and held her against my chest. She fought against me, but I held firm. Arden, are you feeling okay? You're burning up.
I drank too much tequila last night.
She had a fever. I doubted that a hangover would give her a fever. That whole thing that you saw with Tiff on my car, it was a setup. I didn't invite her there, and I didn't want her there. When I came downstairs and saw her, I kicked her the hell out. If you're upset with me, be upset with me for something I actually did, not something you think I did." She went still, but she looked up at me with watery eyes. "As soon as I made sure she was gone, I went down and filed a restraining order." I stroked her back. "Sweetheart, I had no idea you stopped by. I would have come to you sooner and explained. I promise you, I won't ever cheat on you, and I won't ever lie to you. What you saw last night wasn't me cheating on you. I would never. You're it for me. I love you, Arden. I want to be with you forever. Only you." She chewed on her lower lip. "You mean that?" Fat tears spilled down her cheeks. "I do. Come on, I'll get you home." I picked her up. "I can walk, Flynn." "I'm carrying you." She didn't fight. She buried her face in my neck, and it stayed there until we reached her house, and I put her down in her bed. When I moved away, her hand snapped out and caught my arm. "Don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm just going to find you some medicine and water." I pressed a light kiss to her forehead before rifling through her medicine cabinet. By the time I returned, she was passed out. I left the ibuprofen on her side table and climbed in behind her. Wrapping my arms around her, I held her to my chest and stroked her back. We stayed like that for the rest of the day and all night. Chapter 17. Arden. My massive hangover was actually a touch of a hangover and a lot of a nasty virus that lasted 4 days. I didn't remember much because I mostly slept through it, but I did remember Flynn being in and out, cleaning up after me, feeding my cat, mopping my head with a damp cloth, and bringing me soup, water, or pain reliever. By the time the weekend came around, I was feeling a bit more like myself. When I woke up, I listened for Flynn, but the house was quiet. I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand. It was Sunday. I would normally have spent the entire day stressing about dinner at my parents', but I wasn't going. I was sticking to my guns about them. They needed to learn boundaries. I flicked on the bedroom TV and found that the classic movie station was playing a lineup of Rock Hudson and Doris Day movies. Hissy Fit was sprawled on the end of my bed, staring at me and occasionally licking his paws. It was a quiet morning. Between pillow talk and lover come back, I finally got up and took a shower to get the stink off me. I dressed in another pair of pajamas, stripped the bed, and changed the sheets before climbing back in and pulling the blanket over my head. I must have fallen asleep because when I awoke, I felt Hissy Fit touch my foot. I wiggled my toes to play with him. "Just keep your claws to yourself." "Don't I always?" I screamed and sat up. "You scared me. I thought you were Hissy Fit wanting to play. I should have known better. He hates me." "The cat? He doesn't hate you." "He doesn't?" "No. He's just not a people cat, but he cares a lot about you. He considers it his duty to take care of you. He patrols routinely to chase off any rodents or squirrels." "How would you know?" Never mind." "Huh. All this time I thought the cat hated me. He just had an attitude." Flynn smiled down at me. "You look like you're feeling better." I nodded and pulled the blanket up to my chin. "I feel fine." "So, you're well enough to get out of bed? Because we have plans." I frowned. "We do? What kind of plans?" "It's a surprise." He pulled the blanket off me and grinned. "As much as I like these cute pajamas, you need some real pants on." He dug through my closet and pulled out a pair of yoga pants and a t-shirt. Handing them to me, he lightly kissed the corner of my mouth. "Put these on. Hurry, we're going to be late." I got out of bed but laughed. "I need a bra and panties." He waggled his eyebrows. "You sure?" "Flynn." "Bra or no bra, you've got 30 seconds. I grabbed a bra and strapped myself into it while he watched and made growly sounds. When we got outside, we climbed into his Mustang that was parked in the driveway. I was excited about whatever surprise he planned.
until he pulled out onto Main Street a few moments later and then turned right onto Palm Street. My stomach sank as I realized where he was taking me. Oh, Flynn, no, this is a bad idea. I wasn't kidding when I told you that I freaked out on them. I took a flame shooter to this bridge. We can't be here. He parked in front of my parents' home and got out of the car before walking around to my side, opened my door, and stared down at me.
You getting out on your own, or am I carrying you?
You wouldn't dare. His brows shot up. He would. Why did you bring me here? Why would you want to come back? They were awful to you. They're going to be even worse now. Let's just go before they see us, please. He bent down and scooped me out of the car.
It's a family tradition, come on.
Only because I knew he'd throw me over his shoulder and carry me inside like a caveman, I agreed to traverse the front walkway on my own steam. Every single step felt like one step closer to World War III. I realized Flynn meant well and probably thought he was doing the right thing, but this was a bad plan, the worst. The front door opened just as we got to the top of the stairs and Mom stepped out on the porch. I was shocked to see her wearing jeans and a blouse. She almost looked casual. With a forced smile on her face, she held out her arms to me. I stared at her outstretched arms, transfixed. It was a gesture I hadn't seen since I was in grade school. My hesitation didn't deter Mom from stepping forward and wrapping her arms around me awkwardly. She patted my back and then stepped back again and looked to Flynn. Thank you for bringing her. Sunday dinner just wouldn't be the same without her. I looked up at Flynn and frowned. Had we entered the twilight zone? His palm pressed against my lower back, urging me inside.
Let's go, sweetheart. We don't want dinner getting cold.
Mom made a choked sound, like she had started to speak, then forced herself to cut off the words before they came out. She just waved us inside and led us through the house and out into the backyard. Backyard? The all-weather outdoor table was smaller and much more informal than the dining table inside. Everyone was there, sitting around it, perched like they were waiting for lightning to strike at any moment. Mom sat next to Dad, leaving the head of the table and the seat next to it open for me and Flynn. Flynn pulled out a seat for me and then sat beside me.
Smells great.
I watched in absolute amazement as a bucket of fried chicken was passed around. Following that came mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and cornbread. I sat dumbfounded as Flynn spooned a heaping mound of mashed potatoes onto my plate.
That enough potatoes, or you want a little more?
He glanced around the table, his look daring anyone to comment. I noticed the plates were paper. The utensils were plastic. What the fuck is happening?
Language, Arden.
Dad cleared his throat and shook his head.
We're attempting to make some changes, expand our horizons.
Changes? Horizons? I felt like I died and was in some previously uncharted level of hell. My family is eating outside, fried chicken on paper plates with plastic cutlery. What is going on? Where is the wine? Mom held up a plastic tumbler. Oh, there's wine. I just had to research which label went best with a family-size clucking bucket.
Flynn brought to our attention that we're a little stuck in our ways.
Dad waved his half-eaten drumstick around as he talked.
Apparently, you had some words with your mother and sisters. We all came to the conclusion that we could make an effort to be a little more flexible. Flynn gave us ideas and helped us orchestrate some changes.
So we're out here in the yard with the bugs, eating poultry prepared in a communal tub of lard. Mom sighed heavily. We're trying. You see that, right, Arden? We're trying. I sank back into my chair and studied my sisters. Chloe was frowning down at her plate. Haley had a look of vulnerability as she just sighed and nodded. So, you're doing all of this for me. Flynn stroked his knuckle down my cheek.
They're doing this all for you. Your family has a tradition. I'm not going to mess that up. No matter how stiff this place is, they're your family and they matter to you. So they matter to me.
I blinked back tears and looked around at them. They were all such assholes. But I loved these assholes. They were my family. I loved them and desperately wanted to be enough for them, no matter how much they sucked at times. Guys, I appreciate this. I want your acceptance and I want you to accept Flynn, but this? This is fucking weird. Chloe groaned. Thank heavens. That's what I've been saying. We can pretend like we're the Cleavers all we want, but cluck and bucket outside on paper plates is weird. I'm going to have to do 2 hours of extra Pilates classes to make up for this. Haley shoved her plate away and looked down the table at me. We love you, okay? You're our little sister. Sorry you think we're mean. Sorry that we said your ex-con boyfriend is a criminal, but this is too much. I shrugged. Yeah, this is too much. Flynn laughed and gestured with his head toward the end of the table where Dad sat.
I don't know. I think your dad likes the changes.
Dad was dipping his chicken breast into the gravy carton with one hand and taking a long pull from a Suds beer with the other.
A smart man you've got there, Arden.
I stood up and pulled Flynn to his feet. This was a nice gesture and I appreciate it, but I need to get out of here. We'll be here next week. Thanks for dinner. Mom stood and cleared her throat. We do love you, Arden. I nodded. Me too, Mom. Then I pulled Flynn back through the house and out the other side. Once we were safely inside his Mustang, I looked over at him and laughed. Okay, I just need to know, how the hell did you turn my family from the biggest bunch of snobs this side of the Mississippi to cast-offs from Hee-Haw? He pulled out of the driveway, then took my hand.
Turns out your dad invested heavily in Vincent's chain of nightclubs. The two of them made a few bad decisions, inexperienced really, and were in danger of going belly up. With my expertise and connections from the distributorship, not to mention my hefty investment capital, I did what you might call the bailout. I'm now a non-silent partner and 51% shareholder.
I leaned back in the seat and laughed.
No wonder Chloe was so tongue-tied today.
So, I'm curious. Do you have any other surprises up your sleeve for me today? Flynn flashed his signature cocky grin.
Well, I thought maybe we could spend the rest of the day in bed.
I grinned back, teasing. You did, huh? What exactly did you think we'd do in bed?
Well, I figure you can read aloud from Loving in the Pale Moonlight. Then if you want, I'll just lie there and pretend to be in a coma while you have your way with me.
He burst out laughing. That is not funny. He pretended to stop laughing when I smacked him, but his shoulders were shaking. Life with Flynn Bennett would never be boring, that was for sure. And my mom was wrong. Sometimes fairy tales do come true. The end. Thank you for listening. This has been Chaste Mate, Tiger Shifter Romance, Cybermates Book 3. Written by Candace Ayers, narrated by Maeve York, copyright 2020. Stay tuned for Changed Mate, Bear Shifter Romance, Cybermates Book 4.